His family threw him into a lifeless desert for receiving the so-called useless skill, tree planting. They thought they had exiled a failure. Instead, they unknowingly gave him an entire kingdom to build. With every tree he plants, the barren wasteland begins turning into a paradise filled with legendary fruits, divine beasts, and even the world tree itself. The people who abandoned him wanted him to disappear. But what happens when the wasteland becomes the richest land in the world? This story begins with the protagonist Woody's father taking him by the hand and saying, "Kensei, Dragon Knight, hero, and great magician." He was born into the Conrad family, meaning he would become one of the legendary heroes. He needed to continue working hard, and great magic would manifest itself. He happily told his father, yes. Sometime later, the priest in the church announced his name and placed him on a magic circle. The protagonist excitedly thought, finally, he would receive the same power as his father. The priest announced his gift, planting trees. MC looked at the priest in bewilderment and noted, "What?" Everyone present began to mock him. The priest said, "Planting trees. What a beautiful and peaceful gift." The father sat there, his expression foreboding. The protagonist thought in confusion, but this is a completely different gift. How could this be? Everyone began to whisper, how could this happen? The child of a righteous man, but he received a gift unrelated to heroes. So the engagement with the Tristan family would be immediately called off. The father, overhearing this gossip, could barely contain his anger. As the protagonist began to descend into the hall, his brother Acid bumped into him as he climbed onto the pedestal, sarcastically saying, "Get out of the way, you loser, brother." The priest called his brother's name, and it was his turn to learn his gift. The MC was incredibly confused, and it seemed to him that a voice came from the portrait of the great mage hanging on the wall, expressing disappointment. At that moment, the priest admiringly proclaimed, "Acid Conrad, his gift is the same as his father's." The protagonist, hearing this, wondered in bewilderment. Why? He was supposed to inherit his father's power. The father jumped up, approached Acid, and embracing him by the shoulders exclaimed, "It's clearly his son. He is a worthy successor to the Conrad family." The protagonist looked at them sadly, unable to believe it. The brother, hugging his father, stuck his tongue out at him and shouted, "He's an idiot." The father turned to Acid and said that from today on, he would be the eldest son. Sometime later, the MC, standing in the garden, picked a flower and seemed lost in thought. His brother appeared on the path with two maids. He approached the protagonist, snatched the flower from his hands, crumpled it, and throwing it away, asked why he was still there. The protagonist, confused, said, "His flower. His mother planted these flowers." The brother laughed and sarcastically asked the girls, "Did they hear him? He's 15 years old, and he's still a mama's boy." The girls told each other, "You suck." The MC objected, "No, this is what's left of his mother." Aside said maliciously, "She was just another one of his father's girlfriends, nothing more than trash. If she's already dead, shouldn't she get rid of everything she left behind?" The maids laughed and said, "That's it. We need to throw everything away." Acid exclaimed, "Did he hear them?" He hit the protagonist in the forehead and exclaimed, "He needs to be thrown away too. There's no place for him here anymore." The protagonist would have fallen if the maid Ira hadn't run up to him and caught him. She asked if he was hurt. MC replied in fear, "It doesn't matter. It's too bad she came. If she sides with him, she'll be kicked out too." She looked at him in surprise. Acid called out to her and arrogantly asked, "How dare a pathetic maid get in his way? What an insolent maid." He grabbed her and said he'd show her the power of a great mage, and then she'll fall at his feet and dump Woody. MC jumped to his feet, shielded the girl with his body, and shouted, "Stop. He'll leave right now, to any place he chooses. So, let him leave Ira alone. He's asking him to." The maid looked at him in surprise. The brother grinned maliciously in response. After some time, the allies walked through the desert. Exhausted from heat and thirst, the protagonist apologized to Ira, and eventually he dragged her along with him. The girl protested. No one had dragged her. She volunteered. He had absolutely nothing to apologize for. He replied sheepishly, "Even though she said so, it's still his fault. But what are they doing in this godforsaken place?" His legs gave way, and he sat down on the sand. The maid called out to him anxiously. He barely audibly murmured, "Under the scorching sun, in this place, in a couple of days, only bones will remain of them." Ira quickly activated her gift, poured him some water, and told him not to worry so much. Her gift was water magedom. Even in such a place, they won't be left without life-giving moisture. At least, they won't have a problem with that. The girl looked at him carefully, handed him a cup of water, and said she was sure she received this gift for this day. He said, touched. She always helped him. Suddenly, he coughed, apologized, and noticed that he had sand in his mouth. Ira grabbed her head and exclaimed irritably, "She'll flood this desert." Taking cover behind a single boulder, the allies were silent for a while. Then the maid said, "By the way, she hadn't even known that such lands even existed on the Conrad family's territory." He replied, "Well, yes, although there's nothing in these lands at all. The kingdom and his father simply decided to give up on it." He remembered how his brother had asked sarcastically, "Right? Straight away, where he wants to go. Then, he'll go where he belongs." Loser, he thought. Acid told his father about this, and they sent him to the desert lands of their territory. Apparently, they want him to make this desert green. Ira asked anxiously, "Is he suffering from sunstroke?" He admitted a little. The maid gasped and dreamily exclaimed, "Then, they need to plunge into the water immediately. They will be completely soaked, and it will be easier." Well, and then, although no, better not, but even though they have water, Surviving in these conditions will still be difficult. She is afraid that they will not be able to live like this for even a couple of days. Survival will be difficult. He would like to have at least something to start life here. The protagonist took out his tool, a magical bag with its own infinite space. You can store anything in this. He began to take out things, a tent, a chair, more sleeping bags, and other things. Ira exclaimed in surprise, "Is this a map of the area?" The protagonist replied, "Yes, it is an old thing, but it might come in handy. In fact, his father gave it to him. He insisted he take it." That's all he told him. What was on his mind? If he still had parental feelings for him, he was even happy. He opened it and said, "Judging by the map of the area, this is simply a boundless desert. Yeah, there seems to be a village in that direction, but there's not even a small oasis on the way." Ira exclaimed. "Yes, an oasis." He asked in surprise. "Did she find it?" The girl answered, "Not quite, but we can do it ourselves." The girl exclaimed enthusiastically, "With their gifts, we can create our own oasis, their own little paradise." His appearance confused her, and she asked in bewilderment, "Is he against it?" MC said, "The sand isn't nutritious. There are no nutrients. Trees won't grow here. No wonder Acid chose the worst option. He said so himself. You can't plant a tree in a lifeless desert. He was exiled here at his brother's suggestion. His power was useless here." But Ira wasn't about to give up so easily. She suggested he at least try. With her water magic, these trees might survive. What did he think? In any case, they had to at least try. She touched his hand. He thought her gentle touch really did give him confidence. Until they tried, they wouldn't know that was true. But if they failed, Ira might become disillusioned with him. Although, no, she wasn't like that. She had always been by his side, no matter what. How dare he doubt her? It was wrong. With her, failure wasn't a problem. She would still be there. He couldn't let her die in this desert, no matter what. With these thoughts in mind, he stood up and activated his skill. Suddenly, a system screen appeared before him, asking if he wanted to plant a tree. The answer options were yes or no. He thought, even though this gift had taken everything from him, planting trees had opened a new chapter in his life. He activated the positive option, and immediately a small tree emerged from the soil. The system reported that his level had increased. He had planted enough trees, and as a result, his stats had also increased. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "It's tiny. What the heck is this?" Ira screamed joyfully, "Wow! So that's his gift. This tree is so cute." Suddenly, a voice appeared in his head and said that his tree planting skill would increase with use. He needed to plant as many trees as possible so he could level up quickly. The protagonist, frightened, thought, is he hearing a voice in his head? Looking at the girl, who was engrossed in the tree, he noticed that Ira seemed to be deaf. His gift was talking? He didn't even know such a thing was possible. The voice continued, "As he levels up, his skills will improve." He couldn't believe it. Skills? He thought skills and a gift were the same thing. So, that's not the limit of his power? Well, there's still a lot unknown about the gifts. Will he be able to figure them out as he levels up? But how will he level up? A voice issued a system message, saying the level up would occur after planting a certain number of trees. To plant trees, he needed to use smile points. At that very moment, the system screen appeared again, displaying the words, "Available smile points 2p." The MC looked at the smiley face in confusion and thought, "Smiles?" The voice replied that he earns smile points by interacting with others. He needs to entertain, delight, and embarrass. The more positive emotions he evokes, the more smiles he'll get. He saw a diagram on the screen, smile points to tree level. The voice added that not everything in the world has to be complicated. For example, let him try looking into Ira's eyes and holding her hand. He thought sheepishly, how should he do that? The voice replied, "Take it as if he's afraid of breaking it." The protagonist carefully took the girl's hand. She looked embarrassed and asked in surprise, "What's wrong?" The voice suggested, like this, let him look into her eyes. The protagonist fulfilled this requirement as well. Then he said, "This tree reminds him of her somehow. He likes it." Ira's legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the sand. He called out to her anxiously. The voice reported that 7 smile points were received. He asked if she was okay. The voice explained that the number of points earned directly depended on the positive emotions she experienced. She was head over heels in love with him. The protagonist, confused, wondered if this meant Ira would be happy if their relationship were more than just master and servant. He looked at the girl in surprise and, with a twinge of negative emotion, wondered if he could make anyone smile. After thinking for a moment, he told the girl that even if they couldn't create an oasis, he wanted to create a place filled with laughter and smiles, where there would be no wars or famine, and everyone could live happily. That's the world he wanted. The voice reported that 4 smile points were received. Meanwhile, in Tristan's house, Nadia was looking out the window at a huge tree. Suddenly, a large, beautiful bird perched on it. It was the divine Simurgh. Nadia angrily swung her sword and began to chase the bird away. She shouted, "Let him fly away. This is a gift from someone dear to her. She'll kill him if he scratches it." The Simurgh thought in surprise. From someone dear to her? A girl, a tree. Is this the gift of the creator of the world tree? The Simurgh asked. Is that person dear to her the creator of the world tree? Nadia suddenly rushed to the tree with a scream, slammed her fist on it, and shouted, "Woody, you fool!" The force of the blow was so strong that the tree shook. The Simurgh thought in surprise, he feels like he shouldn't have said that. The girl sat down under the tree, cried, and said, "He said he'd marry her." The astonished bird tried to calm her down, telling her not to be so angry. He was just sitting on a branch. He didn't mean any harm. Nadia grinned, jumped to her feet, and exclaimed, "How dare he embarrass the saint of the sword?" The Simurgh retorted in bewilderment. "No, they were just talking normally," she shouted angrily. "No excuses." Raising her sword, she added, "Unfortunately, he's a monster, and therefore no match for the holy sword." The Simurgh irritably advised her to sheath her sword. "He may be a monster, but he's still a bird, and the divine bird." The Simurgh. "He thinks she can kill a god?" Nadia thought in surprise. "A divine bird? Nonsense, she could definitely defeat him." But since she is an experienced swordsman, she can tell that this rooster is clearly not simple. He called this tree the World Tree, but she thought that only existed in legends. In any case, this Simurgh entered the room when no one else had access. He's clearly quite intelligent. He's a master of words. It's hard to believe, but it's true. He could be a divine bird. The Simurgh said he understood her surprise. They rarely appeared before their people. He would leave this place immediately. But before that, let her answer one of his questions. Let her tell him the name of the creator of the World Tree. Nadia noted in bewilderment. "A genius?" Snorting, the girl grinned and said, "He really must be a divine bird since he understood everything right away. He's the Simurgh, right?" She would believe his words. He remarked in surprise. How could she believe everything so quickly? Just recently she wanted to cut him down. Nadia admitted that wasn't the issue. It's just that almost no one acknowledges the main character, no matter what he did. So she believed him because he called him a genius. Woody Conrad. That's the name he so desperately wanted to know. He was her fiancé, a bright and kind man with a gentle gaze. She thought sadly, but now their relationship was broken. The Simurgh rushed toward the exit and thanked her. She exclaimed in bewilderment. What was he doing? Was he going to look for Woody? The Simurgh answered, yes, he would fulfill his duty and follow him. Nadia drawled, "So, he knows where the protagonist is right now?" He replied, "No, he doesn't." She stared at him in surprise. The divine beast exclaimed, "Wait, does that mean she knows where he is right now?" Nadia turned away and sighed, saying, if she knew that, she would be with him by now. He was no longer in the Conrad mansion. That was the only thing she knew. But no one tells her anything. It was as if MC had never existed. He had just recently had a gift-receiving ceremony, and she angrily told him to get lost. What kind of marriage was he talking about? She'd rather marry a dog. With that, she hit him. He gasped and said, "She's amazing. She doesn't even use her gift, but she's so powerful." She asked irritably, "Is he trying to suck up to me?" The protagonist said she was so cool. He had nothing. He'd always admired women as strong as her, and there was no lie in his words. He hadn't even tried to get close to her, simply because she was the saint of the sword. She couldn't pretend he'd never existed. Then she'd just find him. The Simurgh replied, "He'd flown in on the tree's energy. There could only be one creator in this world." Nadia said, "Give her some time, and she'll find him." The Simurgh asked in surprise, "Will she go with him?" The girl asked if he could take her with him. She had something important to tell him. Without thinking twice, the Simurgh activated his power, and a whirlwind swept the girl up into space. She said her name was Nadia. As she soared above the city, she continued that she was ready to drop her last name and let him simply call her Nadia. After a while, Ira exclaimed, "There's been a huge sandstorm this morning." The protagonist agreed with her and added, "They won't see blue sky all day today." The maid exclaimed, "But they have a tree. With its power, they have a barrier that protects against sand and insects. There's some benefit." She never thought it would have such power. Such a small tree, but so useful. The MC noted, yes, he was surprised too. The girl sighed and said that if she sold all her possessions, even her clothes, to protect it, everything would be different. He laughed and noted that she no longer acted like a servant. He thought, but if you look at it that way, this tree could even protect against the rain. If they sold something like that, then maybe it really could solve their problems. After a while, Ira called out to him and said the sun would set soon. Maybe they should rest? He agreed and asked her to put the tree over there, and he would create another one. After that, he created another tree, and Ira exclaimed in delight. The barrier had grown even larger. Now they definitely have enough room. We need to prepare sleeping places. The protagonist pondered life in the desert. Day 3. He had planted 12 trees so far. When he first arrived, he felt only despair. But trees have a barrier. They also have other skills that help them survive. At level 3, he gained a skill. This allowed him to replant already planted trees without any problems. However, he couldn't do anything without smile points. Therefore, it was better not to create disposable trees now. Suddenly, a noise was heard. The allies turned and saw several creatures. The protagonist panicked, thinking, are these desert monsters? Even if they are not strong, he cannot fight the monsters. But suddenly the creatures turned and went back. He thought in surprise, are they leaving? Ira asked, should we go after them? MC replied, no, best not to provoke them. He touched the barter with his hand and wondered if it was repelling the monsters, emitting some kind of vibration they didn't like. He hoped so. He needed a break. The maid exclaimed, yes, right now. She made him a drink and said it was usually cold at night. Maybe he could use the water to keep everything warm. He thanked her and noted that at least in moments like these, he felt like his daily life was still intact. Ira's tea warmed him up. He felt her care. He sipped the drink and said out loud, this is the most delicious tea in the world. The girl was delighted by the praise. The voice announced he had earned 6 smile points. The protagonist thought in surprise. He hadn't even meant to compliment her. Looking at the stats screen, he realized that thanks to Ira, he could plant another tree. To level up, he needed to plant 3 more levels. Each level costs 4 points, so to get 3, They'll need 12 points. He has 7 now. He could use 5 more, but he's probably too impatient. The voice suggested that if that was the case, it could suggest ways to make her smile. He replied that it wasn't necessary yet. First and foremost, he wanted to make her smile just for the sake of it, not to gain experience. Rushing would only make things worse. It would be better if he could make her smile naturally and effortlessly. The voice said it was a wonderful idea. He said, but perhaps he would still use its services sometimes. Looking at the stats screen, he thought, by the way, you can check your point history here, right? Reviewing the results, the protagonist noted that this was the last one, 6 points. The number of points earned is always roughly the same, but here for some reason, it was less. After analyzing the events, he realized he had gotten it then, during that incident. Then he asked her what she thought of his idea. The girl lay motionless. He exclaimed in fear, "What's wrong with her?" The girl, crying, replied that she thought he loved her. He then thought she was talking about that very thing. When he brought her back to her senses a bit, she sheepishly apologized, saying she'd simply overthought things and was overjoyed. Those were just the words. Yes, exactly. He'd gotten 4 points when she'd nearly fainted. Then, he'd gotten those points. He stared thoughtfully at the stats screen. At that moment, Nadia and Sigmar appeared out of nowhere. The girl, approaching, joyfully called out to him and asked if he really thought she wouldn't find him. At that moment, Acid let out a puzzled sigh and asked if Nadia had disappeared. The speaker knelt before him, apologized, and added that she'd only left this. With that, he handed Acid a letter. It read, she had no intention of marrying a man she didn't love. She'd better drop her last name. Acid angrily tore the letter to shreds and ominously exclaimed, he hates strong-willed women. Let them find him this idiot at any cost. He thought angrily. She had damaged his pride. He would break her. At this moment, the protagonist, looking at Nadia in surprise, remembered their farewell. He told her to forgive him. Although they had gotten along, he feared an engagement was impossible. Finally, he would leave her this, as his wish for her happiness. With these words, he created that very world tree. Wait, no, it can't end like this. She screamed again. He thought he could escape from her? MC uttered her name in surprise. He rushed to her and scooped her up in his arms, helping her land. The girl hugged him and said she missed him. Taking his face in her hands, she exclaimed in amazement, it's true, she found him. Ira, looking at them in bewilderment, jealously wondered, what the hell is going on? She called out to Nadia irritably, calling her ex-fiancé, and indignantly remarked that it was rude to butt in like that. What was she even doing here? She'd just watched the protagonist being banished. Nadia smirked and retorted, what about her? Shouldn't she be the protagonist's older brother's personal maid? She's under a new master. Ira was indignant. She was no longer a maid for the Conrad household. She immediately left with the protagonist. She was a retired maid now. Now she works exclusively for MC. She's his personal maid. The protagonist, surprised, asked her to stop and said, confused, he has no money to pay her with. Please forgive him. He hadn't considered that this was actually a job for her. She smiled and replied, the money doesn't matter to her. She'd said earlier that she hadn't followed him on a whim. She'd been ready to do it. He responded sheepishly, saying that even though she'd said so, he still felt very awkward in front of her. The maid had said that in that case, he'd pay later. She chuckled and muttered, though, once the interest accrued, he might have to pay differently. He jokingly asked why he suddenly had a bad feeling. Everything was fine, wasn't it? The girl merely smiled mysteriously. Nadia chuckled loudly and exclaimed, what a clever girl. She hadn't expected such a thing from a maid. She'd done the same. She'd simply dropped her last name. The protagonist asked in surprise, but why? She approached him, pressed her finger to his lips, and answered, what a stupid question. She simply knew what was truly important to her. But for him, she was still his fiancée Nadia. He felt like his heart was about to leap out of his chest. At that moment, the Simurgh remarked in surprise, so Mr. Woody is a ladies' man. He deserved praise. He was just like him in his youth. His allies stared at him in surprise. Ira exclaimed in bewilderment, a huge talking bird? He got through the barrier? That's a high-ranking monster. The Simurgh tried to reassure them. He's not their enemy, and he's not a monster. His name is Simurgh. People call him a divine bird. MC thought in surprise. A divine bird? The very one from their country's legends? If that's true, then does he really exist? No, what if he's a high-ranking monster who can lie? Nadia turned to him, winked, and assured him it was a good bird. He brought her to him. Let her trust him. He thought how easy it was to gain her trust. Ira wanted to prick Nadia with her words, but the girl interrupted her and pointed out, what's wrong with the maid? She thinks she could have brought a dangerous monster to the protagonist? The girls looked at each other defiantly, like two rivals. The protagonist intervened between them and asked them both to calm down and be quiet. Then he addressed the Simurgh as a self-proclaimed divine bird and said it was noisy here. But he still didn't understand what business he had with him? The Simurgh exclaimed, well, that's a good question. It's all very simple and clear. He's here for one reason. He wanted to meet the creator of the world tree. Him, that is. MC thought in surprise. The creator of the world tree? Suddenly, Sigmar, seeing a fruit on one of the trees, exclaimed in surprise, could this really be a miraculous fruit? This is the fruit of the world tree. Everyone looked at him and then at the tree in surprise. Nadia repeated in bewilderment. The miraculous fruit of the tree? What is that? Looking at this, she added that she had never seen anything like it before, and the golden color, yet it glowed so brightly. Sigmar, looking at the protagonist, asked in confusion. Didn't he know either? He replied, perplexed. Well, perhaps it's something amazing? The divine bird said, I understand. Not everyone can understand the value of this. The protagonist apologized to him and said he had heard of the world tree, but he knew nothing about it. Sigmar exclaimed, I understand, but knowledge is important. Fine. He'll give them a brief explanation. The fruit of the world tree is far more precious than any gold, the finest fruit, the most exquisite taste, the most exquisite food in the world. It contains all the nutrients. Just one bite will cure any disease. It will also help preserve youth and beauty. Any rich person in the world is ready to give up all their wealth for this. Nadia exclaimed in bewilderment. Youth and beauty, Arya said. I understand why people are ready to give up everything for this. A true treasure, Sigmar continued. It's also a popular fruit among divine beasts. There's a chance others will appear soon. MC thought with admiration. Other divine beasts. Could the divine wolf Fenrir and the divine bird Phoenix come? The maid asked him, what are they going to do? They knew nothing, and they've already eaten so much of it. Is this supposed to be a sin? Nadia exclaimed in amazement. What? They ate such a valuable thing? The protagonist responded with confusion. They were just hungry, she protested. What if it's dangerous? What if they get a stomachache or something? Suddenly she swayed, and the girl almost fell. The protagonist anxiously asked, is she okay? Nadia replied, sorry for bothering you. She's just a little tired, and she couldn't see anything. In fact, they were looking for them right during a sandstorm. What if they were in dire straits? That's why they were in such a hurry. They hadn't eaten or drunk for 2 whole days. MC, without thinking, picked a fruit, handed it to her, and told her to take it and eat it. They ate it. It was safe. The girl hesitated, but it was very valuable. He laughed and replied that it didn't matter. He wanted her to eat it. Her well-being was more important to him. Nadia carefully took the fruit, thanked him, and thought that she hadn't made a mistake in choosing it. With a smile, she bit into the fruit. A voice in the protagonist's head informed him that he had received 3 smile points. Nadia remarked in surprise how delicious it was, juicy and soft in texture, and the taste was sweet and refreshing. And when it seemed that nothing else could surprise her, she began to taste something sour. It was heavenly delight. After eating the fruit, the girl sheepishly admitted that she felt like she had visited heaven. The protagonist exclaimed joyfully, oh yeah, you can eat just one, and a person already feels full. Ira looked at Sigmar in surprise and asked, considering his words, aren't they universal nutrition, right? He replied, exactly. They contain everything necessary for life. The maid told MC, now I understand why they had so much energy every day. He replied, it's lucky they're also protected by a barrier. Nadia asked in surprise, a barrier? Come to think of it, the sandstorm really doesn't hit here. The protagonist agreed and added, this barrier is protecting them. As long as they're near this tree, it's trying to protect them. Sigmar chuckled and exclaimed, that's not all the power of the world tree. It essentially becomes the center of the shrine. It can also purify and protect everything around it. His allies looked at him in surprise. He continued, the harvest becomes richer, the contaminated land is cleansed, and also, the monsters hate the sacred power it emits. That's why they run, their heels flashing. The protagonist thought, that really did happen. So the ancient tree drove those monsters away. He remarked aloud in amazement, this little tree does so much, so small, and yet so amazing. Sigmar said that, from his perspective, he as the creator of such a tree is far more remarkable. Nadia noted, it's true. So planting trees could have more potential than a great mage or a sword saint, right? He replied that he doubted that was the case. Sigmar suggested that maybe they could make a deal with him. MC was surprised. A deal? The divine beast confirmed, yes. Right now, this shrine is weak. Its defenses and potential have not yet been fully realized. But with his blessing, the shrine's potential can be unlocked. The protagonist asked, confused, if that was really possible. Sigmar proudly replied, he was a divine bird after all. He could grant protection to this place. And as a reward, he wanted 1 miraculous fruit a day. Everyone stared at him in surprise. He noted their reaction with confusion. Perhaps he really was asking too much. The protagonist laughed and exclaimed, at least several. They have many trees. They could easily give 1 fruit a day. Sigmar cried out in surprise. What? The protagonist handed him the fruit and remarked, so, they don't feel sorry for it at all. He wanted to try it? The divine bird, stuttering with excitement, thanked him. Sigmar thought, this man is on a whole new level of kindness. After a while, from his perch, he admiringly noted, wow, there are a lot of world trees there. This was beyond common sense. Could he really create an entire forest? MC laughed and replied, as for world trees, he can create about 4 of them a day. The divine bird replied, he's talking about it in such a way that it gives him a headache. After a while, circling above the desert, he thought, but mindlessly increasing the number of trees could cause problems in the future. If you don't find a good spot, things won't be pleasant. Here on the map was a village in the desert. Suddenly, something caught his attention, and he let out a surprised cry. At that moment, a voice in the protagonist's head announced, the level has increased. Tree planting had reached level 4. The stats screen announced that he could now plant more trees. He exclaimed, "Great!" Ira asked, "Is he planting another tree?" The protagonist replied, without looking up, that he was. Now they could harvest even more fruit. Nadia remarked that the fruit tasted so special that the Simurgh even cried out with delight. They looked at the sky, and MC asked, "So the Simurgh found the village on the map?" He really hoped so. It was good that they could now explore the surrounding area from the sky. It was thanks to Nadia leading him there. The girl grinned happily. Ira was indignant, but what about her? Her water magic helped him every day. He replied with a smile, "Thank you." He could smile thanks to them. Both girls smiled sheepishly. A voice in his head said, he earned 6 smile points. More smile points. He got 3 points from both. More talk, more smiles, more trees. He'll plant a new tree. What's become available to him in this area? He was surprised. Did he have other trees? The voice replied, yes, he'll see them now. The stat screen showed that he had access to the world tree, peach tree, apple tree, pear tree, mulberry tree, persimmon tree, and chestnut tree. He was surprised. So many? Now he has a choice. It turns out he can plant more than just the world tree. Are they fruit trees after all? Is the world tree also from this lineage? Well, anyway, while they wait for the Simurgh, he'll try planting this. With these thoughts, he called out to the girls, chose an apple tree, and planted the tree. Confused, Ira asked, "A new tree?" The sapling began to grow before their eyes. The girls were touched by this. Then the maid noted in bewilderment, "This doesn't look like a world tree." He answered, "That's right, it's an apple tree. It's a small sapling now, but later it will bear delicious fruit." Ira said dreamily, "Delicious." Nadia murmured thoughtfully, "A promising investment in the future." The protagonist thought joyfully and with surprise, "Do they really like the fruits of the world tree so much?" He added out loud, "He could also plant a pear and a peach tree, maybe even create an entire orchard." Nadia remarked, "Wonderful. That's perfect for the future sanctuary." She didn't think it would grow in sand. The world tree is something special, Ira said, but an apple tree is just an apple tree. He thought, of course, they need water and soil to grow. That's why they need good soil. Leaning toward the apple tree, he apologized for the little wait. He would replant it when he found a good spot. The girls looked at him with warm smiles. After a while, the Simurgh arrived and anxiously addressed the MC, saying that his help was needed. The MC, perplexed, asked, "What's wrong?" He replied, "He'll understand everything when he follows." Ira pointed out, "But he's a divine beast." The Simurgh chuckled thoughtfully and said that divine beasts are bound by rules. They can't interfere in people's lives too much. But on the other hand, there's him, the protagonist. He can do something. The maid remarked in surprise, "Is he the type to act like a bystander?" Nadia replied, "Divine beasts really do have rules." Finally, the Simurgh exclaimed, "I see, they're heading that way." When the protagonist saw 2 people lying on the sand, he thought in horror, "Are they dead? No, that can't be." Ira and Nadia rushed to the sufferers. They were alive, but exhausted and dehydrated. Nadia asked, "Are they desert dwellers?" Dan replied, "I'm hungry." Meg asked, "Are they adventurers?" MC thought in confusion, unable to move. The people right in front of him were in trouble, but he couldn't do anything. Suddenly, a thought occurred to him, and he mentally exclaimed, "Exactly." When the girl picked up the fruit he gave them, she noted in surprise how sweet its aroma was. He said, "Let them eat this. They'll gain strength right away." The guy held it out, but it's their food. Meg agreed, adding, "They can't even give them anything in return." He assured them with a smile that they had nothing to worry about. They wouldn't go poor from just one fruit. They broke the fruit, tried it, and simultaneously exclaimed in delight how delicious it was. The girl said, "My body feels so light," and the hunger immediately disappeared. Dan exclaimed joyfully, filled with strength. Ira turned to her master and said, "Amazing." He agreed with this and thought his gift could help people. The guy said they had more strength than when they left the village. Meg noted, and indeed, thanked them very much for saving their lives. Ira organized water for them. The protagonist clarified. They mentioned a village. Were they too from a nearby village? They exchanged glances, and the guy replied, "Yes, the situation there is dire." The girl added, "You can't even call it a village anymore. More and more people are dying of hunger. They can't bear the hunger, so they decided to hunt small monsters." Dan added, "But as they can see, it was a reckless act." Nadia thoughtfully noted that it seemed the situation there was worse than they thought. Ira turned to the protagonist and looked at him meaningfully. He thought the locals needed help. Out loud, he said, "Okay, they're going there. They will feed everyone in need." His allies smiled approvingly. The sufferers looked at them in surprise, then at each other, addressing them by name. They thought, "It seems the god has finally found them." Sigmar accompanied his allies, soaring through the air. The village was a horrific sight. It looked lifeless under the blazing sun. Broken dishes lay everywhere. Shukri sat in one of the tents with 2 children. The little ones were begging for food. He apologized. The daughter, barely moving her lips, asked why the god wasn't giving them food. The father hugged them tighter and said, "If he even exists, maybe the monsters had eaten him long ago." Ira remarked in surprise, "This is a village." Nadia drawled, "I can't bring myself to call it that." Meg said sheepishly. They accompanied them to their village. The protagonist assured them not to worry. They wouldn't cause any trouble. First, they should talk to the village headman. Shukri came out to meet them. He could barely stand, leaning on his sword. The children looked at their father in fear and cowered. 2 nearby villagers became wary at the sight of him. He glared at the visitors and said, "Get lost. Anyone who enters here will be killed." The allies stared at him in confusion. Suddenly, the sword fell from his hands, and he staggered. The children called out to him in alarm and ran toward him. 2 villagers also rushed toward him, but the man managed to grab the weapon leaned on it again and shouted at the visitors, "Don't come any closer." At that moment, Dan and Meg shielded the allies with their bodies, and the boy shouted at him to take his time. "These are good people," Meg added. "They brought them here." The village chief asked in surprise why they left the village. The girl replied that they were truly sorry. Dan replied, "But they just wanted to hunt little monsters." In the end, they were mistaken. If they hadn't met these people, they wouldn't have been able to return. Shukri replied, "I understand." After that, he lowered his head and apologized to his allies for being rude to them, and thanked them for saving their people when they were in trouble. MC exclaimed, "Don't apologize. They just gave them some food." He thought he was scared at first, but it seemed this Shukri was a good man. Seeing the man rejoicing over Dan and Meg, he wondered if he was the village elder. He seemed scary to him, but he did it because he wanted to protect everyone. He looked around. Having calmed down, it immediately became apparent that all the locals were exhausted, barely able to stand. Returning to his tent, Shukri sat down near the entrance and once again apologized to the newcomers. He added, firstly, he would like to express his gratitude for saving them, but as they could see, there was nothing left in this village with which to thank the travelers. Nadia replied that he needn't worry about that. For the protagonist, gratitude isn't the most important thing. Ira added with a smile, "That's right, he simply helped people in need." Looking at him, she winked conspiratorially. The protagonist blushed and said he seemed a bit embarrassed. Then he turned to Shukri and said that since he'd come here, he thought he'd help the rest of the village. The village chief repeated in surprise, "Help." MC pulled a full plate of fruit from his bag, handed it to Shukri, and offered to treat everyone to it. The chief stared at the plate in amazement. All the villagers perked up. What was this? It smelled so delicious. When everyone tried the fruit, their delight knew no bounds. The villagers rejoiced. The food was so delicious, they felt like they'd arrived in heaven. The chief turned pale, looked up at the sky, and said, "Oh, Grandma's calling him." The protagonist cried out anxiously, "Don't let him faint." Nadia smiled and said, "She understands this feeling." Ira added, "It's delicious, a true heavenly delight." The children rushed to their father. The boy screamed, his hunger immediately vanished. The daughter added, "She's full of energy." Shukri hugged his children and bursting into tears said he thought he'd never see their smiles again. His daughter said with a smile, "Oh, their daddy's a crybaby." His son said, "His belly's really full. It was so delicious." The allies watched them with smiles. Sometime later, when everyone had fallen asleep, the village elder, sitting by the fire, told his saviors that both the old people and the children had been fed. The protagonist noted, "Come to think of it, the only young men here were Dan and the village elder." Nadia asked the man if something had happened in this village. Shukri lowered his head and answered regretfully, "Yes. In this desert, there's a perpetual shortage of water and food, constant conflicts that never end. They've lost the fight for life." Ira gasped and said compassionately, "It's terrible, but they're all desert people." Shukri said that even though they were from the same desert, the locals were from different places. Many people from different countries fled here. Some wanted to escape the war, others from taxes. But it's dangerous here. There are tons of monsters. Many people simply die in this desert. They aren't native to this desert either. Nadia noticed, "I see. This is the perfect place to escape." MC thought about it, but wandering monsters. He remembered reading that monsters living in the desert are often extremely dangerous. Besides, the desert is barren. The local lands are practically impossible to develop, which is why everyone abandoned them. He can understand the village chief's feelings, how hard it was for them all. How can he support him? This is, after all, part of the Conrad family's territory, which means it's his father who should be looking after them. He's the one who imposed high taxes and oppressed these people. Because of him, everyone is suffering. They found themselves cornered in such a dangerous place. Did he simply not notice? Or was he deliberately ignoring all of this? Looking around, he saw Ira giving the old people a drink and Nadia talking with the village headman. Then he looked up and noticed the beautiful starry sky. But now he saw things he'd never seen before, and he knew things he never would have known before. His father hadn't told him, but now he saw everything with his own eyes, and this time, he would lend them a helping hand. At that moment, Sigmar appeared above him and asked if he had made up his mind. The protagonist's determined expression and gaze answered him better than any words. The protagonist turned to Shukri and said he wanted to create a world without wars and conflicts. No, he would create it. After that, he told the village headman his full name and surname, adding that he was an aristocrat. Aristocrats must serve the people. To do this, they must not skimp on resources. He saw the real situation, and now, ashamed in front of him, he asked for forgiveness. Ignorance was his sin. He wanted to change everything. He wants to see smiles on their faces, and he swears that he can change everything. If he can, then let him become the ruler of this territory. At this time, Dan asked again in surprise, "Does he want to change their lands?" Meg answered. The protagonist told the headman so. The guy suggested that maybe he overheated in the desert. It gets cooler at night. Maybe he will come to his senses by sunrise. The girl, covering herself with a blanket, said, "Well, yes," she thought. "Living in the desert is hard. It is a real hell to live here." With these thoughts, she fell asleep. She woke up from the fact that a tree leaf fell on her face. At that moment, Dan ran into the tent, excitedly called out to her, and said, "Just let her look. This is their breakfast." In his hands were ripe fruits. She exclaimed in surprise, "Wow, today too. Yesterday they ate such a delicious fruit, and today she is dreaming?" He grabbed her hand, pulled her along, and said, Let's go. When Meg stepped out of the tent, she couldn't believe her eyes. There was a real orchard all around, and all the villagers were happily eating fruit. The girl wondered in surprise, "Is this a dream?" The headman's daughter said, "Nadia, she picked it." The girl praised her. "She's so smart. She's even doing better than her." The headman's son, squeezing the fruit, remarked on how soft it was. Ira said, "Of course, that's a sign the fruit is ripe. After the harvest, they'll eat it all together." The girl, looking at her brother, asked, "What's wrong with him? He's all red like an apple." Everyone was happy. Meg ran up to the protagonist and the headman and wished them good morning. Shukri smiled and remarked, "Is that so?" The girl asked, perplexed. "What's going on?" Dan decided not to wake her up early. The headman smiled and replied, "Is that so?" For the first time, they were all full and able to sleep properly, and it was he who asked her not to wake her. Dan exclaimed, "Please don't say that. He just wanted to harvest with his sisters." Meg drawled sadly, "Really?" The guy cursed himself. He'd said something unnecessary. He started making excuses. She'd misunderstood. Meg responded with resentment. It's at moments like these that a person's true nature is revealed. He rushed after her, calling her name, trying to explain everything to her. MC wondered with a smile if everything would be okay between them. Shukri laughed and said, "It's all a joke. They'll make up. Especially now, when their village is full of color." But he didn't expect to see trees in the middle of the desert the next day. He still found it hard to believe that this wasn't a dream. The protagonist thought with a smile, the biggest problem for the inhabitants of this village is hunger. That had to be solved first. In addition to the world tree, he also planted other fruit trees in the middle of the desert. He planted an apple tree, but he never imagined it would grow here. It seems his tree planting is quite unusual. The trees are bearing fruit even in the sand. He feels like all this work for the locals was worth it. He also earned a lot of smile points, although he didn't think it would turn out so well. He received these smile points from the village headman, Meg and Dan, as well as from the rest of the villagers. This is how their lives have changed. Now only he could. A true miracle has happened for them. Ira called out to him and said they had distributed fruit to everyone in the village. Nadia remarked that the fruit was simply delicious. He thanked them. Nadia remarked, "Really, these are amazing fruits. They satisfy hunger and thirst and are good for your health." Ira added, "They give strength and valuable energy, and the taste is also a joy to the soul." The protagonist thought about it. Previously, he had thought fruit was just a snack, but what he grows here satisfies hunger and gives strength. Moreover, they are easy to transport and store. Moreover, the fruit can also be exchanged for other items. But it's too early to talk about that. First, he must fulfill his promise. He must create a place where everyone will smile. If he can make this place a sanctuary, then they will surely no longer suffer from food shortages. Has the village chief acknowledged him? All these people care about each other. And then he suddenly appeared. Are they ready to trust him and forgive him? Shukri turned to him and asked if this was the nature of his power. He answered, yes. He planted these trees with his gift. The village chief said that the gift is a special power that only aristocrats receive. It seems that he really is an aristocrat. He hates aristocrats. People abuse their power and use people. For them, they are just another person who can be easily disposed of. But he is different. While everyone else abandoned them, he came to help them. He looked closely at the MC and added that he was very surprised when he said that he'd turn this into fertile lands. They thought it was simply impossible. He had such a confident look then. He already understood the picture he saw before him. It seems he was wrong about him. He had already fulfilled his promise. After that, he knelt before the protagonist and bowed his head. The allies looked at him in confusion. The village chief declared that this village and land now belonged to him. Woody Conrad. They had narrowly escaped death thanks to them, and they could never repay them adequately. Everyone would agree. The protagonist looked at the smiling villagers and thought, he felt their warmth. Moreover, he felt immense trust from them. Now that he had received these lands, they had chosen the path to their prosperity together. He knelt before the chief and shook his hand. At that moment, Sigmar appeared beside them. They flinched in surprise. The chief's children exclaimed in fear. A huge bird? The protagonist told the divine beast that it had chosen a sanctuary. It spread its arms wide and exclaimed, this place will be a safe haven for everyone. Sigmar replied that it understood. Then it flapped its enormous wings and created a fountain right in the middle of the orchard. A woman standing there barely managed to grab hold of a tree trunk. All the villagers were alarmed. Meg exclaimed in bewilderment, what is this? Dan was also perplexed. What the hell is this? The village chief's children exclaimed joyfully. Wow, they'd only seen things like this in fairy tales. The boy screamed, wow, they even have a puddle here. His sister replied, no, it's called a fountain. Shukri muttered in confusion. What is this? Then he looked at MC in confusion. The protagonist, watching Sigmar go, happily wondered if they had, without realizing it, encountered the true savior of this world. At that moment, in another part of the desert, a tree leaf fell from the sky. Fena clutched it in his hand and ran back to his camp with a loud cry, yelling, boss! Kaden lazily asked, what happened? They encountered a giant sandworm? The boy showed it to him and exclaimed, let him just look at this. It just flew over his head. The boss stared at the tree leaf, surprised, thinking, this and in the middle of the desert? Besides, it looks fresh. Now that's interesting. Leaping up, he grabbed his sword and spoke. Something new appeared. So, it must belong to them. After all, this entire desert is theirs. He swung his sword and licked the blade. His henchmen looked at him happily. After a while, the protagonist pondered. They had chosen a name for the village, Venti, which means fertility. The children were frolicking in the fountain, and Ira and Nadia were keeping an eye on them. One of the elderly villagers said, "Venti, just yesterday there was nothing here. And now this name describes this village perfectly." He turned to the protagonist and added that they should thank him for all this. An old man standing nearby was indignant. Why was he addressing him informally? This gentleman became the ruler of Venti and their land. Both old men fell to their knees and bowed to the protagonist. He sat down in front of them, took their hands, and said they could just call him by his name. By the way, he'd planted even more fruit trees, so let them fill their bellies today too. After a while, Ira, having set the table, turned to the villagers and said they could begin their feast of freshly picked fruit. Shukri's children were the first to rush to the table. Nadia turned to MC and suggested he take a break. Harvesting so much fruit every day was getting really exhausting. He agreed and noted that it was because there were even more trees now, 24 of them. She replied that thanks to the sanctuary, they'd managed to create a beautiful orchard here. He said that one such tree produces approximately 5 fruits an hour, so that's 120 fruits a day. The villagers no longer need to worry about food. She laughed and said, "Well, yes. And after 8 hours of sleep, even 40 fruits grow." He said it was almost impossible to eat it all. Besides, each fruit is unique, but the fruits of the world tree are of the highest quality. At that moment, the Simurgh flew up to them, grabbed one, and began to eat it. The protagonist addressed him by name. He replied that he couldn't stop himself, and he only ate fruits from the world tree. After the shrine was built, they became even tastier. Oh, yes, that's why they bear fruit every day. Of course, before ordinary trees begin to bear fruit, a lot of time and effort must be invested. But the trees he plants develop quickly and bear fruit too. MC admitted, yes, it amazes him. The world tree was bearing fruit on the very first day. Planting trees is more amazing than he thought. Nadia noticed, that's for sure. Suddenly, the Simurgh said, "Is he strange? Does he think this is abnormal?" Suddenly, it dawns on the protagonist, and he says he wanted to show him something. Having led him to the right place, he showed him what he wanted. The divine beast exclaimed, "Is that a withered tree?" MC replied, "It's an apple tree that was planted outside the shrine. It grew and bore fruit, but withered overnight." Nadia thoughtfully remarked, "While the trees within the shrine are fine, it seems they won't last long outside." He agreed, it seemed so. Even if tree planting allowed trees to be planted everywhere, they wouldn't last long without water. The Simurgh replied, "Understood," logically. The protagonist continued, "But the world tree seemed an exception to the rule." The divine beast replied, "In any case, we need to explore all the possibilities of its gift." He had something for him since he was approaching it with such enthusiasm. With these words, he lowered something heavy and bloody into his hands. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "Is that monster meat? How heavy is that?" Nadia anxiously asked, "Is he all right?" MC asked the Simurgh in surprise. Could he really carry such heavy things? He chuckled and said it was no problem, considering how much of the world tree's fruit he allowed him to eat. He gave him one such fruit a day, and in exchange, he was the keeper of the shrine. But he still felt he wasn't giving him enough in return. Therefore, he would periodically gift him monster meat or other materials. Nadia approvingly remarked, "Good meat. I wish they could establish trades soon so people could get their hands on such meat more often." The protagonist exclaimed, "That's for sure." They were getting far more fruit than they expected. He thought many would agree to buy. If they traded fruit, everything would definitely work out. He thought that once they managed to establish trade, their shrine would also begin to prosper. It would be a win-win situation for both parties. He thanked Sigmar for such a generous gift. He replied, "You're welcome." It's no problem for him. After that, he looked carefully at his allies and added, "But it seemed they needed to be more careful. In this desert, they could attract the attention of more than just monsters. Venti is perfect prey for desert bandits." His allies looked at him warily. After a while, a voice in the protagonist's head announced that he had leveled up. A new type of tree had been unlocked. The stat screen notified him of his 5th level. He also had 98 smile points. The voice continued. Moreover, several functions of the shrine had been unlocked and many advanced skills had been acquired. He asked in surprise, "Why so many of them?" Ira exclaimed in alarm, "What happened?" He laughed and said, "It looks like he can now plant even more trees. But there's more." He pointed to the new saplings and told her to look at these. The girl asked in surprise, "Are these new trees?" He replied, "Yes, persimmon and chestnut." Her surprise and delight knew no bounds. MC remarked, "By the way, chestnuts aren't something you can just eat, are they?" The maid replied that if you gather more, you can eat them with sugar. You can also grind them up and make a dessert, but since they don't have the ingredients yet, they could just fry them. If you cook them over low heat, they should be delicious. He was fired up by the idea. He needed to gather more and fry them. Let her leave it to him. The girl thanked him with a smile. He thought, the only thing he hadn't planted yet was mulberry. With his level up, he'd gotten even more trees. Opening the system screen, he eagerly wondered what was new there. He now has access to grapevines, a tree house, a tree of light, a tree of fire, a tree house again, and a tree of light. The protagonist thought, perplexed, wait, what? Grapes, that's obvious. And what about the rest? A tree house, light, fire? Such trees simply don't exist. He's very curious. But he's not sure he should show them to the others. What if they get scared? Still, he needs to try. But even just trying for fun isn't so great. It's probably best to put all that aside for now. He can now plant even more trees. The voice announced that he'd also gained breeding skills and a new sanctuary function. He wondered if these breeding skills would help create new species. And what kind of sanctuary function is this? The children and Ira looked in surprise at the divine bird, who was closely observing MC's thoughts. Finally, the Simurgh told him. He understood. It seemed this meant that the world tree he created, which is the center of the sanctuary, had finally lost its limitations. Seeing the protagonist's puzzled expression, he said, he'll explain it a little more simply. The world tree, with its magical power, can do various things, and now his world tree has begun to absorb more magical power. Consequently, it has gained new abilities within the sanctuary. He exclaimed in surprise. What else can it do? It transformed the sand into fertile soil, and that's not all. The Simurgh said, of course it is. It's a gift. But he was interrupted by Daeyeon and Meg, who were running toward them. They anxiously shouted the protagonist's name and reported that something bad had happened. He addressed them by name in surprise and asked what had happened. Out of breath and nervous, they couldn't speak properly. He asked them to calm down and tell him what had happened. Daeyeon grabbed his shoulders and hurriedly said, they've always bothered them in this desert. So, they were definitely not mistaken, and they're coming here. So, the desert bandits are heading this way, towards Venti. MC looked at them in confusion. Nadia, not flustered, crouched on the edge of the cliff, peered around and said, given the near slack wind, they'd get there quickly. But why now? Had they heard something had changed in the village? She returned to her allies and said there were only a few bandits. She'd meet them. The protagonist called out to her anxiously. She replied that bandits could not be shown mercy. They attacked with only one goal, to take everything the common people had spent so much time and effort on, and they would never return to a righteous life. He exclaimed, stop. Until recently he himself had wanted to become a warrior, so he understood her. But if they were only a small group from a larger gang, it was better to avoid conflict with them, lest the village develop a serious enemy. She looked at him in surprise. He continued, first, let her capture them, and they will talk to them. He asks her, he needs her strength. At this time, the bandits approached the village. Kaden exclaimed in surprise, is there greenery in the village? Zaya noted, it looks like an oasis. The boss grinned and said, they are lucky. There is definitely something to steal there. Zaya sniffed and said, it smells of something delicious. Baya added, they definitely have something delicious there. Gona noticed with surprise, but he did not recall anything in this village at all. Zaya suggested, maybe the traders brought them something? Baya retorted, perplexed, since when did traders appear here anyway? Kaden said, who cares where from? They will simply take everything from them. Gona asked cautiously, but what if there are adventurers there? The boss laughed, grabbed him by the clothes, and remarked, does he think they will lose? The boy replied, of course not. The boss chuckled and asked why he was scared then. Gon laughed unnaturally and replied, he was just joking. In fact, for some reason he was scared. Was everything really going to be okay? He'd only lived this long because he listened to his intuition. On the other hand, the boss hadn't let him down. He'd trust him. Kaden rushed forward and shouted, let's go. From this day forward, this place will be theirs. At that moment, Nadia swooped down on them like a fury, scattering them in all directions. Standing before them, she cursed, damn bandits. Kaden, lying on the sand, said in bewilderment, what? She glared at him and said, if they want to destroy the world Woody is trying to build, she won't hold back. Kaden jumped to his feet and rushed at her, shouting, wait. But then he caught such a blow from the girl that he was flipped over several times. She grinned and said he shouldn't worry, the blow wouldn't be fatal. A while later, the bandits sat tied up in the middle of the village, watching with hungry eyes as Ira cooked. Gona exclaimed, amazing, this is pure paradise. The boss agreed. It really is. He couldn't even believe it. Baya asked in bewilderment, does it smell like chestnuts? Kaden looked irritably at Nadia and the protagonist. He thanked the girl for catching the bandits. But isn't she hurt? The girl replied, of course not. She's the saint of the sword. She had to restrain herself. The bandits exclaimed in bewilderment. Saint of the sword? Gunnar remarked, they certainly didn't stand a chance. The boss angrily called him an idiot and asked if he was afraid of some girl. Nadia irritably yelled at him, come on, stop yelling. Don't they understand the situation they're in? Kaden rudely replied, shut up and don't give him orders. Nadia chuckled and asked, does he want her to draw her sword again? The protagonist said conciliatorily, enough. He suggested everyone calm down. Kaden angrily asked, who is he? Is he supposedly in charge? The MC looked at him and replied, his name is Woody Conrad. He's the ruler of this village. The boss chuckled. Ruler? Zaya asked in confusion. Conrad? Is this a family of nobles? Baya wondered, what are they even doing here? The protagonist replied, he's an aristocrat. To protect the village, he ordered their interception. He wanted to avoid conflict and discuss everything with them. He didn't notice how Shukri was listening warily to the conversation and glaring angrily at the bandits. The protagonist continued, but before that, perhaps they could have a snack? Ira, smiling, served a plate of roasted chestnuts. Zaya and Baya screamed with delight. It looks delicious. The boss snapped at them, and they instantly fell silent. After that, Cotton said contemptuously to the MC, clearly the behavior of someone born with a silver spoon in their mouth. He's trying to buy them. The allies looked at him in bewilderment. Then the protagonist said sadly he didn't think he could convince them with just food. After all, they came to take everything in this village. The boss grinned and said, well, he understands them perfectly, but that won't be enough. They need everything they have. Gona was indignant. If he continues, they'll kill him. Cotton exclaimed angrily, he's an idiot. In any case, they can't trust them. They'll get rid of them at any moment. He glared at the protagonist and said, in this desert, he either survives or dies. There's no point in empty chatter. Ira looked at them with sympathy, Nadia with irritation, Shukri with hatred. After a while, the allies were enjoying their food. The maid said with a smile, it's so tender and delicious. MC agreed, it's very tasty. He needs to give it all a try immediately. She replied, okay, but the bandits don't eat anything. He replied, yes, that's a shame. They're clinging to their pride. But it looks like that's their entire gang, and there's no one else there. Ira noticed, that's for sure. They wouldn't have sat quietly if they had anyone else. At that moment, Shukri approached them. The protagonist said in surprise, the village chief? The man asked what he would do with the bandits. The villagers were terrified. He needed to deal with them as quickly as possible. The protagonist apologized for taking so long. Shukri replied, no need to apologize. They recognized him as their ruler. No matter what decision he made, they would accept it. He wants them to live in the village? MC replied, yes. Ira looked sympathetically at the village chief. The protagonist continued, wanting everyone in the desert to be happy and live in peace, including the bandits. Even if it was difficult, he didn't want to give in like his father. He didn't want to bend to this world. After a while, Cotton angrily told his minions, let them, the idiots think. They had to find a way out. Zaya and Baya, looking at Nadia, who was staring at them, replied, even though he said so, they'd only waste their energy. Better to give up and conserve their strength. The brothers closed their eyes, tired. The boss growled at them, don't fall asleep. They perked up and looked at each other. Zaya said to his brother, considering the local ruler's kindness, maybe they could just ask him to forgive them, and they would say they wouldn't look at the village again? Baya exclaimed, that's a great idea. The brothers turned to Cotton and asked what he would say to this. Perhaps they would even give them a souvenir? The boss exhaled angrily and replied that it seemed they had no choice. Gona looked at him carefully and said they had one more option. They could cast off their bandit life and become residents of this village. Seeing the boss turn away, he let out a shaky breath and continued, but if they just leave, they'll continue to suffer. Why not just stay here? They'll live much longer with their food. Zaya replied, that's for sure. Baya remarked. He had no objections. Cotton said, but all they did was take. He thinks the locals will forgive them for that. None of the villagers have forgotten what they did to them. There's not a single idiot here who would smile at them. Gon lowered his head thoughtfully. Then he exclaimed, even so, he will bow his head to them. He will do anything to earn their forgiveness. Cotton grumbled, what a loser he was, bribed with delicious food. Gon countered, that's not the point. He just wants them all to live as long as possible. And for that, he's willing to cast aside his pride. Ira, seeing the house, exclaimed that this was the master and her new love nest. The protagonist, perplexed, replied that it wasn't. It was the treehouse he planted for the village chief and his family. He'd plant their treehouse a little later. At that moment, Nadia approached them and exclaimed, so this is a treehouse? It's shaped like a house. The protagonist replied that it wasn't just the shape of a house. Let her see what's inside. The girl entered and delightedly exclaimed that even the interior was perfect. Wow, this would raise the local living conditions by several levels. Ira said with a smile that she thought the physical and psychological health of all the residents would improve. The MC thought about it. He didn't know such a tree existed. There were other trees he hadn't tried yet, but he thought that the houses were the most important thing right now. They still kept the bandits at bay. Their presence frightened the residents. At least the tree houses could be locked down. He hoped this would calm them down, and some of the trees might come in handy. At that moment, Cotton called out to his comrades and asked if they thought they smelled something strange. Another guy replied that he couldn't smell anything. He was wearing a blindfold. He exclaimed that they weren't covering his nose. Gona excitedly noted that it smelled like something was burning. Were they really going to burn them? Cotton exclaimed. Stop worrying. At that moment, Nadia said with a smile that it was time for them to finish. They shouldn't worry. Nothing terrible awaited them. After that, they removed their blindfolds and showed them their new shelter, which was surrounded by burning trees, torches. The protagonist said with a smile that they should forgive him, but he hadn't yet learned how to regulate the fire's intensity. Cotton, in complete shock, wondered what was wrong with this village. He didn't understand anything anymore. Ira approached Woody and whispered that the trees seemed to have worked on them. He agreed with a smile and noted that it wasn't a threat, but it should still have made them nervous. MC wondered if animals were instinctively afraid of fire. He remembered this and decided to try planting fire trees. They really did emit fire magic. He decided to make a cage out of it. He smiled and noted that this was their tent. It was hot near the trees, but their nights were cold here, so the temperature would be just right. Suddenly, Nadia pushed Cotton right into a tree and remarked that he had experienced it himself, so they should forget about it if they were trying to escape. At that moment, Baya and Zaya entered the tent and, seeing the food, immediately began eating. They began tasting the fruit and, with tears of joy, declared that the food was delicious. Cotton exclaimed furiously, "What are they eating?" Zaya replied that it really was delicious. He grabbed them by the clothes and shouted at them to spit them out right now. What if the food was poisoned? Nadia sighed heavily and remarked that he was the idiot here. She could have slaughtered them long ago, so why try to poison them? So there was no deception here. The protagonist added that as long as they were within the sanctuary's walls, they were one of them, and they wouldn't let them starve. He was simply doing what every ruler should do. Cotton thought with displeasure that he was taking on too much for a boy. He remembered how, as a child, seeing his father die of starvation, he'd said he'd become very strong no matter what. After a while, MC thought about how he could now eat grapes and make wine. The Tree of Light made an excellent street lamp. Simurgh grabbed a handful of grapes, flew to Woody, and said these were the best quality. He thanked him with a smile for patrolling. The fledgling replied that he needed to move somehow. Nadia, smiling, asked where the divine bird's dignity had gone. The protagonist remarked that she was probably tired of watching them, so let her rest. The girl replied that she was indeed tired, but should she really just leave them? No one else would be doing this. He smiled and told her not to worry about them anymore. He made a second fence in case they got out. Nadia smiled and said that they could rest tonight then. They hadn't slept under the same roof for quite some time. She lay down on the bed and said they had a long night ahead. Ira nervously exclaimed that she wouldn't allow it. At that moment, the Simurgh noted that they were quite close. Fine. He'd just take the fruit of the world tree and run away. The MC replied that this world tree doesn't bear fruit. The fledgling cried out pitifully, "Where is its food then?" He noted with a smile that this world tree was different from the others. Ira asked what that meant. The protagonist explained that until now, all the world trees had borne fruit, but he could plant ones that wouldn't, so it just stood there, and this tree of light served as a lamp. The Simurgh remarked that this tree was lonely without fruit. The protagonist agreed and added that besides, the fruit was very valuable, but he thought, why not create a world tree without fruit? Ira asked if some things could be valuable because they were unique. He agreed and said that, by the way, they had world trees everywhere, and he heard a rather funny comparison. Gold growing everywhere. The girl laughed and said it would be better if they didn't know about it. Nadia noted that the bandits were locked up. Let them make their evil plans if they so wished. MC said he would plant more world trees tomorrow. Those that bear fruit are especially valuable, considering they live in the desert, where food is scarce. He truly hopes they can change the bandits' mindset. Overall, it was to be expected that this path wouldn't be easy. He reflected that frankly, he himself didn't see a future in which the bandits would change and become ordinary people. They hadn't become this way solely by choice. He clearly saw a gap between them that needed to be filled. Nadia, smiling, placed her hand on his shoulder and remarked that they would simply try, little by little, and something would definitely work out. Ira added that if they were kept an eye on them, they could help with the harvest. The bride said that, in principle, they could sign them up for manual labor. They still needed to figure out how to get water and make a field, but that didn't seem impossible to them anymore. MC, smiling, thanked them and said it was time for them to rest. Nadia noted that he could force him, but she didn't think they could change that way. Suddenly, the Simurgh said that for their shrine, this might not be such a big problem. The protagonist replied that he didn't think it had anything to do with the shrine. The fledgling exclaimed that he didn't understand. He had said that the shrine had the ability to protect its territory from evil. He exclaimed in disbelief that it was a barrier that repelled monsters. The Simurgh replied that the barrier had another feature. It worked not only from the outside, but also from the inside. Of course, a villain's heart couldn't be changed overnight, but the more time they spent here, the purer their hearts would become. It would take time, but the process would stop if they left the shrine. The more powerful the shrine, the stronger this effect would become. Furthermore, the stronger the faith of the locals in their gift, the more powerful the purification process would be. The protagonist remembered how, as a child, his teacher had explained to him that aristocrats were the only ones who could receive the gift. Commoners very rarely received the gift. There's no need for a blessing ceremony for commoners. He was now thinking about how, when a noble turns 15, they undergo a blessing ceremony and receive a gift. A gift is a talent that opens many doors for a person. They were taught that the difference between aristocrats and commoners is that they have a gift. Could status really influence this? He always doubted it, even though the answer was right under his nose. But what the Simurgh had said, perhaps with the help of the shrine, they could bestow a gift even on commoners. In that case, they would upend the very structure of the world. The Simurgh had said that they were too afraid now, but that by receiving the gift, they could gain more self-confidence. MC excitedly said that if they could truly perform the ceremony, it would be amazing. Ira noted that the villagers were commoners. She wasn't sure they would be able to receive the gift. Nadia said she'd heard it was possible, but the chances were very slim. The chance wasn't zero, but the ceremony still wasn't being held. The Simurgh exclaimed that they needed to gather the locals and hold the ceremony right now. After a while, all the villagers gathered in one place, and began discussing whether some kind of event was being planned. Perhaps a holiday? The Simurgh, looking at the crowd, noticed that everyone seemed to be there. So, today they would hold the blessing ceremony. Shukri, shocked, asked what he had just said. The ceremony was only for aristocrats. They were commoners, weren't they? The Simurgh, smiling, said they would start with the village headman. Shukri replied that he didn't need to do that. He wasn't sure commoners should go through this ceremony. Ira, smiling, noted that the divine beast insisted. When Shukri approached him, the Simurgh said that his gift was venerable. This is a leader who leads people and instills hope through faith. The village chief, in shock, said he couldn't believe he'd received a gift. It had been inside him all along, but he couldn't see it. But the ceremony had awakened this power within him. Nadia, surprised, said she didn't expect the village chief to have such a rare gift. The protagonist replied that it was because the Simurgh was conducting the ceremony. The fledgling replied that he hadn't done anything special. The rules were much simpler than they'd made up. A person's origins weren't important for the gift, which is why the village chief had received the gift. Nadia, perplexed, noted that they'd been taught differently. The Simurgh replied that he was sure most aristocrats did have rare gifts, but even commoners could receive a rare gift. MC, in shock, exclaimed that this couldn't be true. Did they just make up these rules? The girl said that, frankly, she still hadn't fully grasped what was true and what wasn't, but it made a huge difference. He agreed with her and added that much more could be achieved with the gift. At that moment, the village headman's children began congratulating him. His son exclaimed that he would be next. Shukri replied that he hadn't yet turned 15. The ceremony could only be performed after 15. The Simurgh noted that this was also just a local rule. Age had no bearing on it either. The protagonist said that he was continuing to shatter his worldview. Ira added that he would shatter the worldview of everyone present. The Simurgh said there was more. They would move on to the most interesting part. Let Shukri perform the ceremony in his place. The boy, in complete shock, asked what he was talking about. He couldn't perform the miracles he was performing. The divine fledgling replied that he had nothing to fear. Any gift could be given by a reverend as long as he was in the sanctuary. Of course, he can do everything himself, but he'd prefer to work less, and he doesn't slack off. When he performs the ritual, he connects with the god. This is quite difficult for him because he doesn't have many abilities. The protagonist noted with a smile that he hadn't realized he was such a small fry. The Simurgh replied that, in any case, it was good that a reverend had appeared to do his job. Shukri excitedly said that he didn't even know how to use his ability yet. The divine fledgling replied that he shouldn't worry. He knew how it worked. He should close his eyes and concentrate on his gift. He just needed to feel it within. The village chief did everything according to his instructions, after which a divine light appeared, distributing the gift to several residents at once. Meg received the gift of a pirate, Fiona the gift of a fire mage, Dan the gift of a swordsman, and Makar the gift of a water mage. Afterwards, Shukri said with a smile that after the ceremony, 20% of the residents had received the gift. Nadia noted that this wasn't as rare as they'd been told. The protagonist exclaimed delightedly that this was unexpected. It was much more than they thought. The village chief replied that he was also amazed, but many people were disappointed that they hadn't received anything. Before, they would have died without knowing they could receive a gift. But now, many in the village could use the gift. MC thought that they were all smiling now. He could use smile points on them. It could be considered that they were helping him too. He could see their smiles again. After some time, Nadia and Ira gathered the villagers with combat gifts around them. The Saint of the Sword noted that they had received combat gifts. They would be training them starting today. Meg excitedly asked, "Is pirate a combat gift?" Ira replied that, in any case, it was a gift that required endurance. Nadia would train the swordsman and the pirate. Makar thought he was lucky that he was a magician because Ira seemed like a more gentle teacher. At that moment, the girl brought over a barrel and instructed him to create as much water as he could. Fiona was to heat the bottle until it burst. Nadia called out to her students and smiled, noting that they would run until the sun set. The protagonist, picking fruit nearby, mused that this was Spartan training. He hoped they could handle it. At that moment, the Simurgh flew up to him and noted that the village had become lively again. Once everyone gets used to their gifts, they can ask Shukri to use his ability to rehabilitate the bandits. The protagonist, surprised, said that it couldn't be forced like that. The Simurgh chuckled and replied that for the Reverend, it was nothing. The Reverend, beloved by everyone, could exorcise any malice. He mused that, frankly, he still hadn't figured out how this rehabilitation even worked. MC called out to him and said that, in gratitude for the ceremony, he had decided to try making new fruit for him. The Simurgh asked with disdain, "What is it this time?" He exclaimed, "Don't let him look at you like that." He thought he'd like it. The divine chick cried out that he was intrigued. The protagonist pulled out incredibly bright fire fruits and exclaimed that he called them flame grapes. The Simurgh, in wild shock, cried out that it burned. He replied that that wasn't all. There were also water, earth, and wind grapes. That was all he had. Nadia, seeing this, exclaimed, "He crossed a fire tree and grapes?" Ira said in surprise. "So that's how he made fire grapes." MC wondered why they thought he was such a fool. He explained that when he leveled up, he gained the ability to crossbreed, so he decided to see what he could do. The maid remarked that crossbreeding sounded vulgar. The protagonist exclaimed that there was nothing like that. He'd crossed a lot of things. Let them try. He took some fruit out of his bag and offered it to her. Nadia looked at the fruit and said it was a regular apple and peach. After tasting it, they both exclaimed in surprise that the apple tasted like a peach, and the peach tasted like an apple. Nadia asked in surprise, "What are they?" The appearance and taste were so different. Ira noticed that her head was spinning. The taste was so different from what she expected. The protagonist smiled and asked, "That's funny, right?" He called both peach and apple. The maid exclaimed, "They taste different." He explained that this was because the fruits inherited their parents' traits differently. So, from a single cross, different fruits with different properties were produced. Nadia said that now she wanted to try more combinations. Ira wondered if a chestnut and peach would be edible. MC replied that there was no guarantee that all combinations would be tasty. The girl exclaimed that interbreeding with a tree of fire was too much. He replied with a smile that he couldn't contain his curiosity. He had nothing more to say in his defense. Let the Simurgh forgive him. He probably wouldn't like the elemental grapes. At that moment, the chick himself tried the fire grapes and literally began to spit flames, but then swallowed them and said with a smile that it was not bad, but so-so. MC wondered in surprise. What kind of assessment was that? Ira anxiously asked if he was okay. The Simurgh wondered if they didn't want this. It was a delicacy that an ordinary person couldn't eat. It was as hot as elemental fire magic, and the taste wasn't very good. The protagonist paused, clearly a divine beast. He was appreciating it so calmly. He was even planning to try the rest. The Simurgh tried another grape variety and exclaimed with incredible joy that it was very tasty. He just ate wind grapes, right? This is something new. The grapes are imbued with the magical power of the wind, and he's very good at wind magic. So for him, the taste is simply heavenly. MC was surprised, wondering if even humans could eat this. They started trying the water grapes, but they didn't find it that tasty. Nadia exclaimed that a water mage would appreciate it. Ira, shocked, replied that she didn't need that. She force-fed her the grapes, after which the girl, with incredible bliss, said that she was filled with a very rich taste, a first for her. The protagonist, surprised, said he didn't think it would have such an effect, so the other two mages would like it too. Nadia noticed that his face was frightening her. After that, Ira came to her senses and shouted that the others should try these grapes. He replied that he was thinking the same thing. The maid noted that Fiona and Makri were water and fire mages. She was sure they would like the elemental grapes too. MC inquired, "Aren't they still training now? When they're done, let her give them a taste." When Ira picked up the plate, she burned herself badly, sending the fire grapes flying straight into Woody's hands. She exclaimed in horror, "How is he holding it? The grapes are as hot as a red-hot coal." He was surprised himself and noted that it looked hot, but in reality, it wasn't. The protagonist wondered if it wasn't working because he planted it. So even though the fire tree looked terrifying, he could still touch it, but he could definitely feel the heat. Come to think of it, he'd held it in his hands before and felt nothing. He exclaimed, "Please forgive me, he wasn't thinking." Ira replied that everything was fine. She hadn't even gotten burned. The Simurgh remarked that the fire was as powerful as a beginner's firebending. Nadia mockingly asked, "So was she just exaggerating?" The girl exclaimed sheepishly that she wasn't pretending and was genuinely scared. MC considered this, wondering if even the flames weren't strong. He still needed to be careful with plants. After that, the divine chick asked if he planned to continue crossbreeding fruits. He happily agreed, pointed to the burning vines, and added that he could expect new varieties. Incidentally, he'd also gotten those from the fire grapes. Ira, surprised, asked if those were the same vines he'd used to entangle the bandit's fence. Nadia exclaimed, "There were fire vines there." That's right. Now she understood everything. That's why it never burned. The maid smiled and said that crossbreeding was fun. They should try as many different combinations as possible. After some time, the protagonist called the village headman to his office. The boy came to him and asked what he wanted to talk about. He replied that he wanted to discuss something with him. But before that, had he gotten used to the life of a reverend? Shukri agreed with a smile and added that he was gradually getting used to it. But so far, he'd only used it during ceremonies. He mostly just sits and reads old notes. Maybe he should take up training too? The protagonist replied that he didn't think so, but he definitely needed a worthy place. He used the planting skill and instantly created a huge church, then entered and announced that this was a new species he bred by crossing a world tree and a treehouse. This would be his church. The village elder exclaimed delightedly that compared to other houses, this one was much more spacious. The protagonist thought happily, glad he'd managed to crossbreed it. He said with a smile that once they finished the interior, it would be a full-fledged church. Shukri agreed and said he never would have thought they'd have such a beautiful church. He noticed that he had fused the house with the world tree. Did he sense holy power with his gift? The village chief was greatly surprised and said his heart and soul were calmer than before. What needed to be done, and what could he do? He didn't need to speak. He understood everything. This place would become a true church. They would invite the desert bandits here, and then drive the darkness from their hearts. After some time, they gathered all the villagers in the church. Shukri stood near the pulpit and said that they had a nameless, small village, merely awaiting its death. But with the advent of a new ruler, they were reborn under the light of the divine beast. The tree village, soon everyone in the desert would know of them. The protagonist, Watching this, said with a smile that Shukri now looked like a professional reverend. Ira agreed, adding that the aura around him had literally changed. At that moment, one of the villagers called out to him, pointing at a huge statue and telling him to look over there. They'd made a statue in his honor, and next to it was a statue of a divine beast. The Simurgh himself exclaimed that it was amazing. They'd perfectly captured his magnificent appearance. The protagonist remarked, seemingly delighted. Ira replied that it wasn't surprising. He was a divine beast, after all. Nadia approached the statue and said she had a similar Woody in her bed. The old man remarked that he could still make one. Ira nervously exclaimed that she didn't need to. The MC, smiling, said that he'd done a great job. He replied that he was glad to hear it. He'd never been able to create anything beautiful. He'd had to play with sand and stones to distract himself from his eternal hunger. It was a complete waste of time, but now they were all saved. The girls immediately ran to him and began to calm him down. MC himself began to tear up and thought that this statue now seemed magnificent to him. At that moment, both girls shared the same thought. She was so sorry she'd planned to cuddle this statue every night. They were definitely thinking the same thing. Sometime after the village chief's speech, the villagers began to thank him and say that he had delivered a wonderful performance. Makri said, with a smile, that he never would have thought they would have a church. There would be enough room for all the residents. The children began to shout that they now lived in the village of the tree. I wish they had new residents soon. They would be the elders, and everyone would worship them. MC, seeing this, thanked the village chief and remarked that everyone seemed to really like it. The guy chuckled and replied that he could have done better. At that moment, both girls approached him and told him that he shouldn't be so modest. He was also making a huge contribution to the development of the village. Shukri remarked that today, for the first time, he felt like a reverend. Yes, he had preached a sermon, but words alone won't bring salvation. They should be grateful to them. But still, he wasn't sure he should hold such a high position. Suddenly, the Simurgh flew to him and replied that everything was as it should be. Real experience can indeed be useful, but sometimes simple words and feelings are enough. That's just how their world works. Shukri said thoughtfully that everything was clear to him. When he read the manuscripts, it was as if someone was guiding him. He had never thought of it that way. The Simurgh noted that these were different people who had left behind their lived experiences. The elder added that now his feelings and his experience could reach someone's heart and maybe even help someone. He believed that their children and grandchildren should know that kindness is what can change their world. The Simurgh exclaimed that this was a good idea. Let him write down his feelings on paper and make his own notes. He shouldn't worry. He could definitely do it. And also, let him remember to give his notes titles. Shukri said he'd always been bad at coming up with names. The protagonist asked, perhaps, tree teaching? He connected the wind from the Simurgh element with their tree. The village headman joyfully exclaimed that it was a wonderful idea. Ira thought about Woody marrying a divine beast and asked, is that a love triangle? Nadia laughed and exclaimed, how could she even imagine that? After some time, she approached the bandits and opened the passage for them. Kadin, with a sly smile, asked, have you finally made up your mind? Wow. They want them to work? Do they still have ideas about how to change them? Nadia pinned him to the ground and told them not to worry. She'd give in a little. Okay, from now on, they'll attend Shukri's sermons. Kadin exclaimed in bewilderment. Are they completely nuts? Gona wondered. What's the point of these sermons? Do they think that's enough to change them? He doesn't know what they're up to, but they clearly don't want to harm them. He runs up to the chieftain and whispers that it might be a ritual, so they want to make them part of the village. Like if they can listen to the sermons faithfully, they'll be their comrades. They want to give them another chance. Kadin replies that they've already crossed the line and they know it. In this desert, they killed to avoid being killed. They did everything to survive. But what happens to those too weak? He got the answer when he saw his father dead. Throw away the sword, forget everything, and just enjoy the food? The dead that lie in these sands will not forgive him. Gona thought about the fact that the chieftain's father was killed by bandits, but he didn't understand. He thought he couldn't change because of his bandit pride, but he believes that since he took lives, he doesn't deserve to be saved. It's easy to just throw away the sword, but if they do that, how can they ever put an end to what they've done? They simply live with their sins. Even if they wanted to become part of the village, the locals would hardly accept them. He was sure the chief understood this perfectly well, but he understood nothing. Who would help those who took everything from them? The locals would gain nothing from accepting them. He wanted to ignore this fact, but it was impossible. Gona apologized and said he was wrong. He was a naive idiot who didn't understand anything, but now he understood everything. He still respected him and would follow him. Nothing had changed, even to hell. After some time, the bandits finally came to the church. Shukri thanked them. Kadin said with displeasure that he had no intention of playing their games. He replied that, in any case, they would start now. He had been discussing something with his comrades before entering the church. If something was bothering him, he should just say so. The chief, with a sly smile, replied that they were simply arguing over him. Shukri said he understood everything. They really had treated them like wild animals. Even though they had no choice, he still felt very sorry. Kadin exclaimed that he didn't care what they were going to say here, but it would be better if they told him what they needed instead of preaching. The elder replied that he didn't need anything, he just wanted to talk while they ate the fruit. The bandits, seeing the food, were greatly disconcerted. The chief exclaimed, "Do they still want to buy them food?" Shukri said that now everything would be different, not like when they arrived here. Then he himself insisted on giving them nothing, but now it didn't matter, they had already eaten their fruit. They would simply eat here from now on. Let them sit down. He's brought fresh fruit for them. He asks that they enjoy themselves. By the way, if they don't eat here, they won't get anything else until nightfall. Cotton asked nervously, so they have no choice? He sat down at the table and said he wouldn't say anything. The village chief replied that he didn't mind. At that moment, the protagonist called out to the divine chick outside and asked what it was like inside. The Seamerg chuckled and replied that they didn't need to worry. They were sitting at the same table. That was already a big step forward. He thought the rest could be left to Shukri and Nadia. Were they really that worried? The protagonist replied that he had faith in the village chief, but still. He remembered how the boy himself had asked if he would let him choose how he would preach. Woody agreed, adding that it was only if he wanted to. Shukri said he wasn't entirely sure whether he would succeed, but he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. They would eat and talk together. The MC replied that it would be safe with Nadia, but he was very afraid they would refuse. The elder sighed, agreed, and said that it would probably be better to give a regular sermon. He shouldn't have come up with something stupid. He thought that even with the gift of preaching, he wasn't confident in his abilities, but he was trying to find the way that would suit him best. He didn't know what to say. What could he do for him? Ira called out to him. After which, Woody decided that they would try. Even if it didn't work out, they could always try again. They would invite the bandits to dinner. He thought that all he could do now was do as Ira had done for him. Trust Shukri and show him support. After a while, the bandits left the church. The MC reflected that the sun hadn't even set yet when Shukri and the bandits left the church. No one expected immediate changes, but it wasn't all that bad. The village elder's expression was calm, and the bandits quietly walked back to their quarters. When it got dark, the three of them gathered near the firewood to rest and grill some meat. The protagonist called out to Nadia and thanked her for her work. She asked what was wrong with that. She was simply keeping an eye on the bandits. They were behaving well, except her shoulders were stiff. The protagonist exclaimed that he could give her a massage then. Nadia immediately blushed and said she felt a little awkward, since he would be playing with her body in front of everyone, but she didn't mind as long as it was him. He could be rough with her if he wanted. At that moment, Ira quickly approached her, pulled out skewers of meat, and said she would give her a massage. And here was some freshly cooked meat. The Simurg smelled the aroma and flew to them. The protagonist, seeing it, remarked that the meat he brought them was very good. The divine fledgling asked, did they doubt him? By the way, how did the sermon go? Thanks to Shukri's gift, did everything go well? Nadia replied that it wasn't quick, but it definitely worked. The headman will definitely handle it. A few hours ago, the bandits were eating food in the church, their expressions extremely dissatisfied. The girl thought they were eating food, but the atmosphere was downright heavy. Baya picked up a peach and remarked that it was very beautiful. Kadeen furiously asked, can he stop spouting nonsense for just a second? Shukri laughed and said that peaches are soft. When they pick them from the trees, they have to be very gentle. The boy exclaimed in surprise, peaches grow on trees, Zaya remarked. He didn't know and hadn't thought about it. He just ate. The headman asked with a smile, maybe they could try picking that next time. The bandit leader exclaimed furiously, he wants to bribe them with nice words and then make them work to death. Shukri replied that even the elderly and children worked in this village. It was good exercise for them. Besides, it was a great way for the elderly to pass the time, but no one was going to force them. Kadeen thought nervously, was he serious? He had no idea what was going on in his head, but he couldn't fool him, and that book in his hands was probably some kind of trap. Shukri noticed his gaze fixed on the book and asked, was that what was bothering him so? He shouldn't be so afraid. These were just his notes. He was recording his feelings and thoughts so that his children and descendants could know about what happened in this village. Parents don't want their children to make the same mistakes they made. And by sermon, he meant what he would preach to them from here. Kadeen snorted in displeasure and said that was nonsense. Shukri smiled and noted that it was about them too. Cruel bandits showed up and took what little food they had. And there was more to it than that. Days of hunger, parents who died for them. And then came the saviors, who turned their village into a paradise. It also says here that the bandits, sensing new profit, returned to the village. Gona, upset, said that they were villains after all. Kadeen exclaimed that they were, after all, a damn bandit. The village chief replied, no, he wasn't saying this to make them think they were villains. Some people were simply unlucky, but to change the future of the desert, they needed to share what they had with others. So he changed his mind and decided that they would share their bountiful harvest with them. They would eat at the same table, and that would be wonderful. In the present, Kadeen recalled the village chief's words again and fell into deep thought. At that moment, the protagonist fell asleep right in his chair while writing. Suddenly, Asid appeared, approached the table, and grinned maliciously. He immediately woke up and exclaimed, why? No, he shouldn't be here. The brother grinned cruelly and replied that it was all true. He was just an illusion. He was the terror terror and anxiety that had settled in his heart. MC asked in disbelief, terror and anxiety? But he didn't have either. Acid, with a sly smile, asked, then what was he afraid of? He would have a happy ending. But did he remember the day he was supposed to become a great magician? He too had been confident that everything would go smoothly, but nothing had gone according to plan. Immediately after these words, the illusion disappeared, and Woody froze in horror. Having calmed down a bit, he looked at the sleeping girls and thought, good thing it was just a dream. He thought what was happening in Venti had given him confidence. Maybe it was because of the bandits. His inner weakness was growing. Although no, Shukri had no problem with his sermons. He couldn't let fear and anxiety get the better of him. Suddenly, Nadia ran up to him, exclaiming that there was trouble outside. MC ran after her in horror, wondering if something was wrong with the desert bandits. Afterwards, they all gathered near the bandits' cage. Cotton, seeing him, remarked that he had finally arrived. He wanted them out of here right now and to help with the fruit harvesting. Shukri explained that he had simply asked if they wanted to help them harvest fruit that morning. The bandit leader exclaimed, don't let them get the wrong idea. He didn't want to work. But the others said they wanted to try. He just played along. The protagonist, smiling, said that all was well then. He would remove the fire trees right away. Nadia whispered excitedly, is he sure? He replied that they were relying on Shukri. MC removed the fire trees, after which the bandits actually went off to harvest. He, seeing this, said that he felt like he was dreaming. Only it wasn't a nightmare anymore. Nadia apologized for waking him up like that, but Shukri asked her to call him as soon as possible. She was hoping they finally have to chop off their heads. The protagonist replied with a slight sneer that he hoped she wasn't disappointed. At that moment, Ira ran up to them and noticed that he was still in his pajamas. He replied that he'd run in a panic. The girl, smiling, said he should go back. She thought they shouldn't worry about them, and once he'd changed, they could have breakfast and enjoy some fresh fruit. After a while, Kadden, having climbed out of the cage, called them naive fools. Baya remarked that he thought he'd harvest the crops and then throw everything away. He exclaimed that that was possible. Zaya asked, so he just wanted to harvest the crops? Baya joyfully exclaimed that he'd decided they'd work in the village. The chieftain furiously crushed the fruit and exclaimed, where did they come to such conclusions? They were the ones who insisted on trying it. At that moment, Gona began to speed up and began eating several fruits at once, then remarked that they needed to eat while they could. If they decided to leave the village, food would be hard to come by. He didn't want to starve anymore. Cotton immediately imagined all his people dying of hunger and turned pale. Then he remembered the chieftain's words about how to change the desert's future. They must share their wealth with everyone else. After that, Cotton immediately ran back to the tent. Confused, Gona asked if he'd said something wrong. Baya replied that no one knew. Maybe the fruit had made him feel ill? At that moment, the bandit chieftain lay down and began to think about what his allies had said. That they were seeing an apple tree for the first time and that apples really do grow on trees. Even if they left here, only a life of poverty awaited them. Then why don't they just work here? They'll live much longer that way. They'll get more food. There's always another choice. If they fall at their feet, they'll let them live in the village. They want them all to live longer. Cotton thought, his thoughts jumbled. Could they really stay here? But hadn't they already crossed the border? He remembered how Gunna had apologized and said he was wrong. He'd always respected him and would always be by his side. No matter what awaited them, even into the depths of hell, they would follow him. Cotton again saw the corpses of his allies. He jumped up abruptly, wondering why he was suddenly seeing these hallucinations. Was it because he'd eaten too much fruit and was now afraid to be outside again? At that moment, Gunna entered the tent with a decanter and asked if he was okay. Let him drink some water. Even if they were planning to leave here, it was important for them not to give up now. They would always support him. Cotton reflected that they were bandits and their past couldn't be rewritten. It was simply unforgettable. Even if they died one day, it would be because they were weak. But dying on the sand, could he die without regret? Could he look them in the eyes? No, he didn't want to see them dead. After a while, Ira poured tea for Nadia and handed her a cup. The girl took it and admired the aroma. She noted with a smile that she had tried making peach tea. They had more workers, so they had a noticeably larger harvest. At that moment, Cotton plucked the last fruit and said that they were done with this tree. In an instant, right before his eyes, several more apples grew. Shukri noted with a smile that a new fruit grows every hour. If they don't pick this, there will only be more of it. The leader took a bite of the apple and asked how much work they had. It was delicious, but if there was only fruit, he began to miss meat. At that moment, they heard screams. Cotton called out to the village chief and asked what the noise was. He replied that training was underway. The villagers were practicing hunting. At that moment, indeed, all the villagers capable of fighting began practicing attacks on the logs. They began using both melee weapons and magic. The protagonist, seeing this, admiringly remarked that they were all very cool. Makri, seeing the bandits, was very surprised. Fiona immediately became frightened and started running. Gona excitedly ran up to the chief and asked, "Was that magic?" Shukri, smiling, explained that it was a gift. The four had undergone a blessing ceremony and acquired their gifts and were now practicing using this one. Kaden nervously noted that he was saying crazy things in a calm tone again, although he was starting to get used to it. Gona approached the log and asked, "Are they using this as an enemy?" Nadia noted that they would move on to moving targets later. Baya said he understood everything, but the log was practically whole. The girl replied that they were striking, but they were still hesitant, so their blows were merely scratching the surface. It was too dangerous for them to attack with full force yet. Kaden chuckled and said that it was immediately obvious they were still complete novices. In terms of experience, they were clearly stronger than them. The protagonist, smiling, handed him a wooden sword and asked if they could show him. After that, all the bandits armed themselves with makeshift weapons. Nadia excitedly asked, "Is he serious?" He agreed and added that they couldn't hurt anyone with a wooden sword. He wanted to see how they managed to survive in the desert. Kaden immediately ordered them to attack, after which all the bandits began attacking the log. Baya and Zaya began striking, causing it to fall to the ground. At that moment, the leader collided with the log and, despite having a wooden sword, he still managed to split the log in two. Gona exclaimed that their leader was the strongest. Nadia, perplexed, asked if he was planning on doing anything himself. Kaden remarked that his role was different. The boy excitedly said that he usually searched for prey. The girl examined the log and said that they had struck a crack. They were doing well, defeating a piece of wood. At that moment, the villagers began nervously saying that they were annoying. How could they not understand this? They needed more training. Shukri, smiling, remarked that this was quite good. They were complete novices compared to them. Now he understood how they were able to survive in the harsh desert conditions. Kaden, with a sly smile, exclaimed that it was true. They were very strong. The village chief replied that it wasn't that. They had excellent teamwork. They moved in a complementary manner. That was teamwork. Therefore, it was still too early for the rest of the boys to fight them. After that, the students began to leave the training ground. Kaden, watching them, asked when they would send them out hunting. Nadia replied that she didn't know yet, but if a weak monster showed up nearby, it would be excellent practice for them. The protagonist added that they were currently hunting, but rarely. They couldn't always rely on them. They needed to be able to protect themselves. It was crucial that they learn to survive on their own. Besides, as soon as they gained confidence, this land would also become richer. He reflected that his father had given him a lot, but now he would follow his own path. He would definitely find happiness. Kaden asked if they should gather everything with their own hands. He mused that the fruit was so sweet because they had gathered it with their own labor. The leader remarked that he, too, would like to eat something he had gathered with his own hands. Nadia, surprised, asked if she had just misheard that. Ira replied that she had heard it too. He exclaimed, "What's so special about that?" Baya and Zaya immediately supported his idea, saying it was more interesting than harvesting. The fruit gave them so much energy. Gona remarked that searching for prey was quite difficult. Nadia wondered if they'd forgotten their situation. The protagonist asked, "What's wrong with that?" The girl nervously exclaimed, "No, what if they wanted to run away?" He replied with a smile, "Let them run." Shukri agreed and added, "Let them run if they want. They wouldn't keep them locked up forever. Otherwise, how could they make them part of the village?" Besides, he didn't want to disappoint them. As he'd said earlier, he wanted to share everything with them. The protagonist happily agreed, took out his bag, and said he had their swords. When they went hunting, he'd give them to them. Baya and Zaya, seeing their weapons, were overjoyed. He noted with a smile that he had the swords, all intact. After all, they were like partners. Suddenly, Kaden, with a serious expression, said they were all idiots. They're bandits, and they gave them food and shelter. And now they are even giving them weapons? Where do they even produce such idiots? They don't know anything about them, not even their names. So let him listen. He'll only say this once. His name is Kaden, next to Baya, Zaya, and Gona. They have wonderful names. Maybe they should give up the life of bandits. After some time, Shukri greeted everyone and said, they will offer a prayer of thanksgiving to the deity of their wind tree teaching. They raised the fruit above their heads before eating, and loudly declared that today they would be able to eat their fill again. They were grateful to the Lord and the divine beast for this generous harvest, and wished bon appétit. After this, Woody asked, "Does the wind tree teaching really have to look like this?" Nadia laughed and said that it sounded very unusual and funny. Ira stood nearby and said that she thought it was wonderful. This was how people expressed gratitude for his kindness. He laughed and said that their sanctuary was overflowing with sincere faith. Simurg said that perhaps it was because the population of their village had increased. He looked to the side and said that it was difficult to say yet whether they had become full-fledged villagers, but it seemed that thanks to Reverend Shukri, they were slowly starting to communicate with the others. He looked around at the people and thought that in the future, everyone in their village could eat, laugh, drink, and sleep peacefully. He must give it his all and do everything in his power. The system announced that the tree planting level was 5, the number of trees planted was 35 out of 50, and the smile points were 102. The available skills were auto-transplantation and crossbreeding. He thought thoughtfully that only 15 trees remained to plant before leveling up. 102 must be divided by 4 points, which is 25 trees. With his current stock of smile points, he could plant as many as 25. When Cotton and his gang attacked them, the smiles in the village noticeably dwindled, but now they were quickly making up for lost time. Then it was decided that he would plant an orchard right outside the village walls. Later, he started drawing and said that if they needed a training ground in addition to the orchard, they would have to plant another world tree and expand the boundaries of the shrine. Ira came to him, called out to him, and asked if she could help with anything. He thanked her with a happy expression on his face and said that, however, it was enough for him just to have her nearby. She blushed deeply from embarrassment and wondered if this was really a sudden marriage proposal. She lost herself in her imagination about this, and he said that, in general, he wanted to expand the shrine, because right now everything outside the walls looked like this. He planned to build an orchard and a training ground in the new territory. She said that she understood that it was already getting quite cramped inside the village. He agreed and said that if they planted any more trees in the village, they would simply get in the way. Besides, Kedon and the others would soon begin training. Ideally, it would be great to move the entire orchard outside. They both said at the same time, with dissatisfied expressions, that however, then it might attract the attention of other desert bandits. The protagonist thought about it, looked at the trees nearby, and then said with an angry look that it was simply incredible. What a stunning sight. She, with a worried look, said that he was acting completely out of character. Wait, these trees. This is an orchard of all kinds of elemental grapes. Just think, even the trees themselves exude elemental magic. He, with a slightly confused look, said that in fact, that was exactly why he couldn't leave them in the village and hid them in a magic bag immediately after creating them. She, with a thoughtful look, said that indeed, these plants can seriously burn you, and if someone decides to try it out of curiosity, the consequences will be even worse. He remembered something and said that planting elemental trees outside has other advantages. Regular fruit trees look appetizing, but can the same be said for elemental ones? She said loudly, surprised that they looked creepy. It wouldn't be easy to do that. Bandits would think twice too. In that case, if he made a hedge out of elemental trees, he could easily plant regular fruit trees inside. He thought that if that was the case, it was decided he would crossbreed the new elemental trees for the fence, and at the same time, plant those 15 to level up. The system notified him that crossbreeding didn't increase the counter of trees planted. Crossbreeding is a skill for combining existing trees and, unlike regular planting, it doesn't count towards the overall counter. He wondered if he'd been so engrossed in the process that he hadn't even noticed. Crossbreeding also costs smile points, so that's just the cost of using the skill? He couldn't help it. He'd have to postpone the crossbreeding and planting until later. However, a system window suddenly appeared in front of him, stating, "It is strongly recommended to level up first." After that, he planted exactly 15 trees, and the system notified him that the level had increased. The number of trees planted had reached the required value. MC was delighted by this, and thought that although he hadn't been able to perform the crossbreeding, he had planted an excellent orchard outside the village walls. Ira congratulated him, and Nadia asked if he had really discovered another incredible ability. He laughed and, with a joyful expression, said that they should pay close attention to his new skill. He activated the automatic harvest skill, and this greatly surprised them. He waved his hand and said that that was not all. He activated the harvest bag skill, and they were even more surprised by what had happened. They approached him and loudly asked, had his skills already reached the level of an independent gift? Was this harvest bag even similar to the gift of magical space, or a spatial bag? He asked them to wait and asked, but isn't the harvest bag skill functionally any different from his magic bag? Ira sighed and said with a serious expression that he'd forgotten that his magic bag was an incredibly rare artifact created using long-lost ancient technology. Nadia said that perhaps it wasn't such a shock now because he always had the bag at hand, but he could imagine if it weren't. He imagined it and said it would be very difficult. She said that there was a subspace inside his harvest bag, meaning spatial magic was involved. Using spatial magic through the tree planting skill, if you think about it, was completely absurd. He thought about what he'd heard about those with the gift of a spatial mage, or a spatial bag being so valuable that they were hired by the kingdom itself. She called his name and said she was beginning to worry about him. What would happen if his abilities continued to develop in such a crazy direction? He became worried when he saw her expression and thought it was exactly the same as when his father turned away from him. Woody asked sadly, "This is just a guess, but if his gift of planting trees becomes frightening, will they turn away from him too?" She stroked his head and asked, "Is that what he was saying? Just as he doesn't judge her by her gift, she does the same." She fell in love with him for seeing her for who she really is. She became very embarrassed, cleared her throat, and said, or rather, exactly that. Even if his tree planting develops to the point where he grows a tree capable of taking over the world and becomes a demon lord, she will still be on his side. Ira said indignantly that in such cases she can speak for her too. Nadia turned to her and said that she wasn't sure about her. He laughed and thanked them both. After some time, he washed his feet and thought that his bad habit had resurfaced. His father's actions had left a deep wound in his soul. However, he needed to put aside unnecessary thoughts and focus on his skills. Activating the automatic harvesting system costs 10 points, but it saves a tremendous amount of time. The harvest bag has a capacity that exceeds even his magic bag, and the best part is, it doesn't require any points at all. What skills and trees would become available to him in the future? He looked up and asked if a tree capable of destroying the world really existed. He thought, but his unpredictable gift for planting trees didn't answer him. After some time, Fiona came to Ira and called her, and she, with a serious expression, said that it was time. She turned to her and said that this mission could not be failed. The day before, a problem arose in the village. There was too much fruit. She looked at it and wondered how they would eat it all. She watched the fruit being sucked into the harvesting bags and was completely shocked. She said that she had an idea. She grabbed her by the shoulders and asked why not use her power to help the village. What did she think? The two of them had to save the harvest. At the same time, the rest of the villagers went hunting for a boar. They attacked it several times, and Meg said loudly that they couldn't let it get away. Cotton quickly ran in pursuit and loudly said that they could leave this to him. He defeated the beast with a blow of his sword, breathing heavily, and said that it had finally stopped. Are they okay? They agreed and thanked him. The former bandits loudly told the boss that nothing less was expected of him. He was already dying of hunger. Nadia said that the two of them had done a great job. She called Dan and Meg and said that desert boars have skulls as hard as cobblestones. He should have hit him hard. She called him and said that he did well with the support. She lifted the boar with one hand and said that not bad for their first real fight as a team. They killed the desert boar and even had a chance to get home before dark. They were all happy about this and said that they would finally go home. Fiona was lucky that she didn't go with them. I thought she said she had business with Lady Ira, right? She's probably helping prepare the meat feast. They started to leave, but Nadia noticed Meg looking into the distance and asked if she was okay. She shouldn't get distracted outside the village. She apologized and said that she really was fine. She just couldn't help but peer into the horizon when they were here and hoped to meet Lan and the others again. After some time, the protagonist thought with a worried look that he hoped everyone would return safely from the hunt. Even for Nadia, this was a large group. Who knows what kind of monsters they would encounter outside the sanctuary. Ira called out to him and said, so this is where he's hiding. He turned to her and said that he thought the others should have returned from the hunt by now. He became worried when he noticed the frightening aura emanating from her and asked if something was wrong. She turned around and said that she was asking him to follow her. She led him to a clearing where there was already a table at which the villagers were sitting and asked him to sit with them. He sat down in his place and thought, even Fiona is acting strange. He apologized and asked what is going on here. She said that since everyone is seated, then they can begin. She is presenting them with a grand tasting. He loudly called her name and said that she should explain what is going on here. This is a meeting. What kind of tasting is this? She said that he should just take a look and everything will become clear to him. Ira turned around and asked to bring it, and she immediately brought trays to the table. She showed them dried fruit, and the villagers said that it smells so sweet and so light. It is like dried fruit. She asked everyone to try it, and Fiona said that she fried it and dried it herself. MC thought that this means that the two of them were secretly making dried fruit. If you remove the moisture from it, maybe it can be stored without harvest bags. The villagers tried it and, with very satisfied faces, said that this concentrated, rich sweetness simply melts in your mouth. Ira laughed and said that she was glad they liked it. He also started eating it and thought it was incredible. The sweetness was much more intense than that of fresh fruit. It wasn't just sweet. The longer he chewed, the deeper the flavor became. He, with a joyful expression, said that it was amazing. The fact that she was able to cook it meant that her fire magic training was not in vain. Fiona thanked him and said that she couldn't yet create a strong flame, but the low heat was just perfect for drying the fruit, although maintaining a constant temperature was very difficult. He worriedly thought that she herself resembled a dried fruit from all this effort. Ira called him and said that this was part of her fire magic training, but with enough firewood, they would have a profitable product. After removing the moisture, fruits last much longer, and in the desert, such sweet food is valued even more than fresh fruits. He agreed, and said that fresh fruits spoil quickly and are easily bruised, but dried ones are different. He thought it could be an excellent commodity. He said that they could produce tons of dried fruits and sell it to those with a sweet tooth, or start with barter. The main thing is to develop a route for importing foreign goods and currencies. Now he understood what she was trying to achieve. She laughed and said that, frankly speaking, she was just looking for a way to save the entire harvest. However, nothing would make her happier than the opportunity to help the Lord. This was just the beginning of unlocking her true potential. After that, she brought a teapot with mugs and began brewing tea. She poured it into the cups and said that it was made by mixing crushed dried fruits with tea leaves. It was fruit tea. The villagers began drinking it and said that it was amazing. The taste was different from the fruit itself, and it had a calming aroma. Woody also tried the tea and asked if it tasted as sweet as it smelled. A villager next to him said that the taste was only subtle, but it brought out the tea itself beautifully. She said with a happy expression that they were all just great, that this was exactly what she was striving for. He said that he understood. She had calculated the proportions of dried fruit and tea leaves. She laughed and said that it was a pity, but no matter how hard she tried, the sweetness of his fruit couldn't be reduced that easily. As they had already noticed, every piece of dried fruit was sweet as sugar. She tried different proportions, but she didn't want the fruit to steal all the attention. She was looking for something that would gently complement both food and everyday life, just like flowers quietly blooming under the shade of the great tree that was their Lord. He said that now that she mentioned it, it really did feel that way. Even if they were just flowers, it would be lonely without them. It carefully watches them, remaining right under their feet. He said that her tea is so similar to her, and he really likes it. Her soul began to leave her body because of this. She called Fiona and said that she would take care of the rest. She approached Ira with a worried look and said that it seemed he broke her. He began to get very nervous and asked if he had overdone it with the comparison. She said that she washed the dried fruits in water many times and tried to carefully choose the right level of sweetness for the tea. She seemed incredibly happy to be praised for this. He asked in surprise, did she wash it in water? It would never have occurred to him. They heard a loud noise, after which children ran to them and loudly said that everyone should come here quickly. The warriors of the village are returning victorious. After that, they roasted the boar that the warriors brought and said that they can sing and dance. Today they are having a meat feast. Shukri started crying after trying a piece of meat. Kaden noticed and asked why he was crying. Baya said it was probably because of the meat, because it was so delicious. Zaya agreed with him, but he wiped away his tears, denied it, and said that wasn't why he was crying. This meat was the result of teamwork between their youth and them, the former bandits. For him, it was legendary meat. Nadia laughed and said that starting tomorrow, they would go hunting every other day. Fiona asked to come with them. Meg laughed and said she was looking forward to the new hunt. She turned to her and asked if she wasn't afraid. She denied it and said that now she was just burning with desire to go outside. Makri said joyfully that he understood her perfectly. Before, the outside world seemed scary. There were monsters everywhere, but now he had his gift. The best thing is that he will be able to burn off all this fruit energy. The villagers approached them and said that youth was a wonderful time. They just shouldn't overdo it. On the contrary, they should have fun to the fullest while there was supervision. Nadia said with a smile that they shouldn't just go along with it. They should think about who would be watching them. The protagonist, smiling, thanked them for their efforts. Thanks to her, they could go outside without any problems. She agreed and said that, however, for such a big feast, they should have hunted more. They needed to collect a whole mountain of boar meat. He thought with a worried expression that this would no longer be a hunt, but a massacre. She said with a determined look that he could just ask, and she would collect this mountain of meat at any moment. He asked with a worried look, only if they stumble upon a whole herd, okay? Later, she dipped her feet in the water and said that, although, to be honest, she was exhausted. However, it was still a pleasant fatigue. Had he ever seen a battlefield? In the 3 years she'd been a sword saint, she'd seen a lot of it. He said that was true. There were always skirmishes in Conrad's where he grew up, but he'd never seen one with his own eyes. She said it was good. He was born with a kind heart. He didn't need to see a battlefield. However, she had seen horrors there. The exhaustion she felt then was different, but now her heart was filled with warmth. Perhaps that was happiness. Later, he was eating fruit, and Ira removed a crumb from his cheek and asked if she hadn't told him about the merchant who had once stopped by the village. He asked with a happy expression, could he return to their village, right? She denied it and said that Meg only knew about him from stories. He hadn't been there lately. He said that when they arrived, the locals were quite wary. He hadn't noticed any trading activity then. She said that if they were still traveling through the desert, maybe they would stop if they passed by. He said that, however, if it had been a long time ago, the chances were slim. He wondered, of course, what to take from a deserted village. No wonder the merchant stopped coming. He said with a sad expression on his face that they would very much like to see them return. She called his name, pointed to the side, and said that Meg and the others had an offer. They approached them and said that they would take it upon themselves to find the traitor during their forays. He was confused by this and asked how they would even do this. They said that they would slightly expand the patrol route. They would do everything possible for this. MC said that if Nadia agreed, then he was also not against it. The desert is not small, after all. Gona said loudly that he would try to use his sense of smell. He was confused by what he heard, and he said that he was a mediocre fighter, but he had an excellent sense of smell. He himself smelled this village, so he would be able to smell them too. He was very surprised by what he heard and asked loudly, "Is this really so?" He agreed and said that he was the first to find yesterday's boar. Finding a person is easier than fighting. He will do everything possible. Meg, with a happy expression on her face, said that they decided on this. They should find this traitor together. They all folded their hands and she said loudly that they should find this merchant together. After some time, Merchant Lan was riding a camel through the desert and said that it was, as always, unbearably hot. She called the camel Chappie and asked him not to overexert himself. She looked away and said that this also concerned him. If he got tired, she would order Chappie to carry him. Adventurer Val laughed, called her sister, and asked what she was talking about. After all, they were her guards. Adventurer Tet, with a joyful expression, agreed and said that they, the Silver Wings, could handle even the blazing desert. Adventurer Garda also agreed and said that they would protect his sister from bandits, and then maybe she would make them her permanent guards. She turned to him and asked, "Did he say permanent guards? Then he should at least get rid of that village accent." Val agreed and asked if he even remembered. They'd told him they didn't understand him at all. Lan said that, frankly, what bothered her more about the accents was that they called her sister. He looked a little confused and said that she'd let them do it herself when she was still an adventurer, so they'd gotten used to it. She denied it, and they asked, "She was A rank back then, right? That's great. But they still haven't gotten past C rank. Abandoning her at her level is such a waste." She said that rank doesn't guarantee anything good. They just summon her to anyone's domain, use her as they please, and then discard her when they're tired of it. There's no justice or goodwill in endless battles, only exhaustion and suffering. Compared to then, she's free now. True, she doesn't really make any money from it, but she travels wherever she wants and encounters a lot of different and interesting things. She may not be an adventurer anymore, but every day still feels like an adventure. They happily said that it was so cool. He even wanted to quit. She asked them not to do anything stupid and said that the three of them still had a lot to learn. Even this desert was part of the experience. There were plenty of people here who needed help. For their sake, they would keep moving forward. They happily agreed loudly. At the same time, warriors from the village were walking through the desert in search of a merchant. Cotton fell to the ground, clenched his teeth, and said that he was going to die. Nadia sighed and said that he should stop. They had just rested. Meg smiled and said that he wasn't much of a bandit. He lacked stamina. Zaya loudly called the boss and said that he would carry him on his back. Vaughn, with a displeased expression, said that he didn't even need to think about it. He called out loudly to Gon and said that he should quickly track down the merchant. He was confused by this and said that it would be that easy, since there were no traces now. Fiona agreed and said that it was to be expected that it would be difficult. Dan called Nadia and asked if that was enough for today. Cotton was completely exhausted, and besides, there was still hunting to do on the way back. She refused and asked, "What kind of training is this then?" Leveling up always goes hand in hand with death. He approached her with a displeased expression and said that it was easy for her to say. They were ordinary people who were dying. Macrae approached Gon, patted him on the shoulder, and said that he shouldn't overexert himself. It's just that the merchant was not nearby. He looked to the side and thought that, after all, they had already come this far. They still needed to scout around a little more. He ran ahead and loudly said that he would go and look around some more. They became worried about this and loudly said that it was dangerous to walk alone. They ran after him and loudly asked him to stop. Nadia caught up with him, grabbed his cloak, but he continued sniffing. They walked a little further, saw Lan's silhouette on the horizon, and she noticed them too. Tet also noticed them, called Val, and asked her to look there. He noticed this and asked, "Are those really bandits?" She got off the camel and said in a serious tone that she would have to kill them. Her face suddenly became much more serious. She quickly ran forward and loudly said that she would personally kill those bandits. They were surprised by this, and at the same time, Meg pointed her finger at the silhouettes and asked, "Wait, that's a person, right?" Dan loudly said that it couldn't be. His nose really did work. Gona denied it and said that his nose had nothing to do with it. Cotton, looking a little worried, pointed his finger to the side and said that they should look there. "Are they running straight towards them?" Lon ran up to them with a frightening expression, and he pushed Gon away and said that they should step back. She ran up to him, struck, but at the last moment stopped the blade of the sword in front of his neck. She looked at Nadia with a serious expression, and he, with a frightened expression, wondered, did she stop? This woman? Who is she anyway? She turned around and asked why she didn't draw her sword. She asked with a calm expression, "Who knows? But what does she think? Crossing swords here means becoming enemies." However, she stopped the strike. She was glad that she was right. She was wary because of this and thought that this girl was no ordinary one. By holding the strike, she not only showed that she did not want to fight, she was counting on her to sense it and stop. It was impossible. Some pathetic desert bandit could not have pulled such a thing off. She sheathed her sword and said she was sorry. It was rash of her to mistake them for bandits. Ted approached her, called her by name, and asked what was going on here. She turned to them and said that it looked like they weren't bandits at all. It seemed she was a nobleman's daughter, and this was her merry company. Cotton, with a displeased expression, loudly said that that was not the case at all. Gon's nose made a mistake, slipping them some strange woman instead of a merchant. However, he didn't listen to him, started crying and asked loudly, "He covered for him, right?" He said with displeasure that he should shut up and listen at least once. She said with a wide smile, "How rude to call her a strange woman. Actually, this beauty's name is..." She didn't have time to finish because Meg ran up to her and loudly called her name. She ran up to her, pointed to her face, introduced herself, and asked loudly, "Does she remember her?" She looked at her and asked, "She's a girl from the village, right?" The other children also came up to her and said that they were here too. She said with a happy expression on her face that she remembered them all. What an amazing surprise from the past. However, hadn't they gone too far from the village? Fiona said that they started going hunting. Mocker said with a smile that since it came to that, they decided to look for her. Lan was very surprised by what she heard and asked, "Did they seriously start hunting?" She grabbed them by the shoulders and said that because she wasn't strong enough, she dragged them all into danger. She failed to bring help to their village. She was sincerely sorry. Later, she listened to their story and with a surprised expression on her face asked, "Did she receive a gift?" She agreed with a happy expression and said that all 4 of them received one. He said loudly that now, thanks to this, they could fight. Lan, looking confused, said that she couldn't even process the information quickly. However, overall, their village isn't what it used to be, right? Having received a positive answer, she said that she found it hard to believe. However, it seemed that the village had changed precisely because of the gifts. Tet said that they should wait. She always thought that only nobles could do such things. Makre, looking confused, said that their lord would explain that. She said with a serious expression that this meant that a certain lord had managed to change the village. Now she was personally interested. She would even like to meet him face to face. However, no, it seemed that their village no longer needed her help, so she would find someone who did. They became very worried about this and asked her to wait. Nadia approached her and said that she was asking her to wait. She was Lan, right? Indeed, the tree village had become much better than before, and no one's life hung in the balance anymore. However, they still needed her power. What she heard caught her attention, and she asked if they had anything specific in mind. She said with a smile that they had certain needs. But that wasn't the point. They needed trade. Their lord wished to share the tree's benefits with the desert inhabitants, to bring prosperity to the entire desert. She began to laugh and said that she had set out to bring prosperity to the entire desert. Also, they didn't want profit, but to enrich the desert? That was so sweet. They were surprised to hear that, and with a worried look, she said that their lord was completely serious. Lan waved her hand and said that they had misunderstood her. She meant that it was a wonderful dream, and she adored dreams like that. Tet laughed and said that she knew she would say that. She laughed and said that she, too, was always ridiculed for her naivety. However, if others laughed at her dream, it only meant that it was big enough. Nadia was about to say something about this, but she, with a determined expression on her face, said that they were leaving right now. They were all very happy about this and shouted loudly. They went to the village, and Lan turned to her and said that she still didn't know her name. "She looks like a noblewoman. Who is she really?" She said with a smile that right now she's just Nadia. She discarded the name Tristan, but she is the saint of the sword. She was very surprised by what she heard and asked, "Did she discard the name?" It's funny, but now it makes sense. If she really is the saint of the sword, it explains her insight. She thought that still, the more she learns, the more mysterious this village becomes. A deserted village, prospering, thanks to gifts involving the saint of the sword from the Tristan family. Also, a certain lord who controls all of this. If she's not mistaken, this desert belongs to the Conrad family. Most of the local residents fled from their oppression and unbearable taxes. If this lord is also from the Conrad family, then this may not be a good undertaking at all. Well, she'll have to see all this with her own eyes. After some time, they reached the village, and Meg, with a joyful expression on her face, said to the respected merchants, "Welcome to the tree village." They looked around with shocked expressions, and Lan, with a shocked expression on her face, said that this is incomprehensible. She was shocked by the trees she saw and thought, wait, why is everyone acting like this is normal? The adventurers said it was incredible, but this is not quite how she imagined the village. He had definitely never seen trees like these before. The world is so huge. Nadia watched their reaction with a satisfied expression and thought that everyone was shocked by the Lord's power. She always knew that there was no one like him. Woody called out to them, was about to say something, but saw strangers and was about to say something. She ran up to him, hugged him, and joyfully said that he could dance. They had found a group of merchants. Ira ran up to them, pushed them apart, and with a cheerful expression told the respected merchants that they could make themselves at home. He also approached them and said, "Welcome." He introduced himself and said that he was the ruler of these lands and asked them to eat as much as they wanted. They saw the fruits, and the adventurers loudly said that these fruits smelled simply incredible. They would be happy to try it. Lon turned sharply to them and said that they should stop. First they needed to finish their introductions, and then they would eat. They were upset about this, and she thought that she still couldn't relax. They could have put something in the food. She called to the Lord and said that she was grateful to him for such a warm welcome. She introduced herself and said that she was a traveling merchant. The people behind her were her guards, Silver Wings. Since she met Meg again, she has not had time to recover from the shock. Honestly, his head still hasn't processed how much the village has changed. The entrance probably didn't help either, but that was exactly the reaction he expected. The trees by the gate were supposed to deter intruders. He thought trees with fog or wind would make many people think twice about coming here. However, he only expected bad people and hadn't even considered that it would scare off merchants, and he was very sorry. He began to bow, asking for forgiveness, and Ira, with a joyful expression, thought that the upset lord was so cute. Lan said that trees are for protection against intruders, so it's effective against desert bandits. But are these really trees? She's never heard of trees shrouded in fire or water. Nadia said it's called elemental. They're special trees grown by the Lord with a gift. Ira, with a joyful expression, said that they are essentially magical trees. Val was shocked by this and loudly asked, "He can do that too?" Lan looked shocked and said that it seemed like they didn't know much about gifts. She took a fruit from the plate and asked, "So, the fruits were also grown for free?" The girls said that she should know. All fruits were delicious. That's right, and it's best eaten with the peel. Tet came up to her, asked her sister to relax, and said that she would taste it for her. She took a bite, and she became very worried and loudly asked her to wait. Suddenly, she felt the taste, and her expression changed dramatically. She fell to the floor with an incredibly satisfied expression, and she became very scared and loudly called her. She loudly asked her to stay with them. The other adventurers also took bites of the fruit, which already angered Lan, and she loudly asked why they ate it. They also really liked the taste of the fruit. They fell to the floor next to her, and she wondered what was going on. She heard Tet's quiet voice, went up to her and asked if she was trying to tell them something. The adventurers said it was so delicious. It was as if he was trying fruit for the first time in his life, like a child. She looked at them with a worried look and thought that everything was bound to go wrong. Their vigilance was instantly lost. Damn fruits, they definitely slipped something in there. The protagonist handed her the fruit, called out, and asked if she could try it too. She was very scared because of this and started to back away, but Nadia came up to her from behind and grabbed her arms, making her unable to move. Ira approached her and fed her a small piece of fruit. She tasted the fruit and thought it was delicious and so good. They let her go and she fell to the floor with the others. The camel came to the room and was very scared when he saw people lying on the ground. The children approached him, held out the fruit, and one of them happily said that Mr. Camel would get some too. He immediately ate the fruit and went to sleep on the floor with the others. In the morning, Lan woke up, abruptly walked out of the building, and saw MC walking nearby. She called out to him loudly and asked in a serious tone, "Did he put something in those fruits?" He was frightened by her words and loudly denied it. She calmed down a bit and thought, what kind of innocent face is that? As if he was sincerely worried that they didn't like it. The adventurers also woke up, walked out of the building, and said in joyful voices, "How nice to wake up." It felt so good, like he was reborn. His exhausted body simply sang with pleasure. He called out to her and asked if she didn't like yesterday's fruits. She started to turn to him and said that it was amazing. However, she will tell you honestly, she didn't trust him. The transformation of the village, these fruits, it's simply unbelievable. She was once an adventurer, and now she has become a merchant. She has traveled a lot, met all kinds of people. Some were vile, some downright evil, and most of them bore the names of noble families. However, this desert belonged to the Conrad family, so she remained wary of his intentions. He said she was right. Conrad blood ran through him, but now, she chuckled, and said with a friendly smile that she had seen enough. He, like these fruits, was not hiding anything. Lan looked up and thought she should have guessed from Meg's smile. However, her heart was filled with fear and doubts about the nobility. Still, why did everything become so clear now? The moment that fruit filled her, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her soul and she felt so calm. She said that if they carried the fruits of the tree village throughout the desert, they could lift the people's spirits. She extended her hand to him and said that, as a merchant, she wanted to be his ally. After some time, Lan changed her clothes and went to wash herself in the lake, and the former bandits peeped at her from behind a tree. Ted approached them, hit Kadeen on the head, and loudly said that they should cast aside bad thoughts. She would protect her sister's honor. She thought that finally she was truly working as her bodyguard. Shukri approached them and said in a serious tone that it seemed they still needed his guidance. He turned to him with a worried look and said that they would not do this again, honestly. He said with a displeased look that one wrong impulse could ruin everything. They could ruin the deal they had just made. They should look over there, their lord, as always, at the top. Woody sat nearby, turned away, apple slices over his eyes, and said the negotiations would continue until the guests left. He said with a happy expression that he would continue meditating until they bathed. Cotton said that, frankly, it was a little creepy. Ira said the Lord was extremely serious. Nadia said that this deal could change the future of the entire desert. Gona said that it still didn't look very good. So far they had only agreed on dried fruit and water. He turned and loudly asked, "They haven't even agreed on all the fruit. Maybe they got a bad trader, and also water." She said loudly, with a displeased expression, that she wasn't there well. Lan emerged from the water and said that water magic was rare, and this spring was a real treasure. Water is always very valuable in the desert. Dried fruit is also ideal for trading. It's not just about quality. It has a long shelf life and is easy to transport, which is very important. She approached the protagonist, removed the apple slices from his eyes, and said that no matter how sad it was time for them to leave the village. She was grateful for the good deal. There were new refugee settlements nearby. She would visit them later and deliver to everyone what he had entrusted to her. As soon as she was finished with this, they would meet here again. They left the village, and he waved goodbye. After that, he said that it was somehow strange. It felt like he was watching the fruit he had grown leave its nest. Shukri called him and asked if he was sure he agreed to these terms. He agreed in a confused tone, and he said that the deal was done. But frankly, they wouldn't really get anything out of it. No one in the village disputed his decision, but I still wondered if he was really happy with it. The girls asked if this was their first deal, so they gave a welcome discount, right? He said that even their scripture teaches sharing abundance, but business is a different matter. Making a decent profit is also necessary to stabilize prices. He began to get nervous about their reaction and said that maybe he really had named too low a price. He still thought it over as best he could, but he could only find out about market prices or the situation in other villages from Lan. For now, he just had to take her word for it, but they would manage. She was a trader, but she puts people first, and he didn't mind making a profit later. Besides, the other villages were in dire straits right now. Nadia said that even if they sold something, the buyers simply didn't have the money or supplies. Ira agreed thoughtfully, saying that they were refugees after all. He said that was why there wouldn't be an immediate profit. But if they started this flow and other villages rose up, they would also start hunting, and trade would become mutually beneficial. He said, with a happy expression, that, in short, it was essentially an investment. Shukri said it was clear they were developing trade and waiting for the harvest. They thought about it and asked, by the way, where are those other villages? Does he have any information? He said he knows nothing about it at all. Until recently, the tree village was very busy, so all communications probably went through Lady Lan. She mentioned that those settlements were relatively new, which means even more refugees have resettled there. A few days later, Caden called Gon, who was walking nearby, and asked if he thought he would soon catch the scent of the merchant. He, looking a little confused, said that so far he didn't smell anything new. To be honest, he had never found her by scent before. He was indignant at what he heard and asked if his amazing sense of smell was a lie. He was confused by this and said that it wasn't quite so. However, this lady said that adventurers have their own tricks. For example, burying themselves in the sand or using natural scents, so they hide their scent. He understood him and asked, so they were just waiting for them to appear? MC peeked out from behind the burning tree, called him, and said in a frightening tone that they could do more than just wait. He turned to him with a frightened look and loudly asked who was suddenly appearing out of nowhere. How did he not boil in there at all? He looked at the tree and said that they had no effect on him. There was no need to worry. Gon asked, what was he doing in the elemental grove anyway? He said with a slightly sinister grin that inside the grove, it was difficult for someone to approach him unnoticed, perfectly, when you want to be alone. They tensed up because of this, and he laughed and said that they didn't have to be afraid. He was just experimenting. To be honest, he was trying to create a new elemental fruit. If we increase the variety of rare varieties, and not just the common ones, they will change trade and everyday life. However, until it grows, you can't know what the properties will be. That's why he conducted tests out of sight, like this. He understood him, and said that he already thought that he was up to something strange there. He laughed and said that he was just developing his skill. At that moment, burning fruits fell to the ground behind him, which made strange sounds. It exploded, and they screamed loudly in surprise. A splinter flew into Cotton's head, and Woody, looking confused, asked what just happened. He picked up what flew into his head, couldn't believe it, and thought, chestnuts explode? They started to extinguish these chestnuts and asked loudly, what is this? It seems that he is doing dangerous things. He noticed their dissatisfied faces, and with a worried look said that they should wait. This is strange. He thought that they should not look at him like that. He crossed the chestnut tree with the fire one. As usual, everything was under control. Previously, this only produced roasted chestnuts. However, this time he left it to roast further, and they started exploding. Nadia ran to him, called him loudly, and asked if he was okay. Ira came running with her and said that they heard a terrible roar. Cotton, looking worried, said loudly that it wasn't us. He swears. Woody apologized for the noise and said that he crossed trees and bred a new fiery chestnut. The roar occurred because it was bursting. They were surprised by what they heard and said that if they ate it, what would happen to their stomachs? He imagined this and, looking worried, said that maybe it wasn't food at all. Nadia looked at the tree and asked, since it was inedible, did that mean the trick failed? He agreed and said that it seemed not all crossbreeding works. An exploding chestnut is just dangerous. While they were talking, Ira walked up to a tree, knocked down a chestnut tree with a branch, then hit it and launched it high into the air. Everyone was shocked by this, and she turned to them against the backdrop of the explosion and said that with these chestnuts, they would build an armed fruit nation. He looked at the tree next to him with a worried expression and said that this fiery chestnut tree was so creepy. She asked if he really thought so. Explosions are so romantic, especially with the maroons. She started crying because of their reaction and said that no one even smiled. Gonna called the gentleman and said that his tree planting was something special. Cotton, looking worried, said that it was really creepy. Do they explode with other elements too? The protagonist said that he was just about to check it out. Even his hands were shaking with curiosity. He was scared because of his facial expression and asked him not to do it again. Nadia asked him to wait and said he shouldn't get into trouble. She approached her and said everything would be fine, that new endeavors always come with risks. Even if a new combat plant grows, they'll just be more careful. He looked thoughtful and said, water maroon and wind maroon, which should they cross first? She sighed with displeasure and said he could do whatever he wanted, but she refused to participate. He used his skill on the trees, and immediately several chestnuts flew away. She looked at them, called him, and asked if they were earth maroons. He agreed, wanting to say something else, but Ira said that for some reason, this chestnut hadn't flown away. She approached the tree and calmly picked one of the chestnuts. She looked worried and called her and said that it was very dangerous to handle them with your hands. She tried to split it, but it didn't work, and she asked what this incredibly hard thing was. She threw a chestnut in front of her, took out a sword and cut it in two. She looked at what happened after this blow and asked, did it crumble to dust? They looked at it and said that this was a very interesting result. She completely agrees with the master. It seems that a new legend is being born. She looked at them and asked what they did here. Smurg flew to them and asked what they were doing here. Some strange thing had just flown to him. He showed them the elemental Maran that had flown away, and MC apologized and was about to say something, but Ira explained everything for him. He understood it and said that the taste was a little sharp with a breeze, but he liked it. She began to cry and said that the water Maran makes tears roll down on their own. Nadia looked at her with a smirk and said it was good that the water only flowed from her eyes. Cotton sighed and said it wasn't much use. What good is the wind blowing away chestnuts, or they're crumbling into dust? Gona, looking worried, called the boss, asked him to be quiet, and said he should watch his tongue. He heard this, agreed, and said he himself didn't know how to use it yet. She said it was completely different from the explosive ones. Apparently, not all combinations are equally useful, but they have other fruits. They can continue to crossbreed elemental trees further. He agreed, and Nadia, with a confused smile, said the main thing is that he doesn't grow a fruit that will destroy the entire village. Ira turned to him and asked, what about crossing it with an apple? He asked her to wait and said that when crossing, the number of planted trees does not increase, and they need to increase their level. This idea caught the attention of the Simurgh, and he asked, then, maybe they should plant grapes so that he would have more wind muscat? He happily said that this was a good idea, then he would do the grapes today. He completely forgot to plant this tree. He clicked on the system window and a mulberry appeared next to them. She looked at it and said that, so this is what it looks like. He said that, to be honest, he was also seeing this for the first time. He thought that he just hadn't imagined what it looked like. That's why he put it off until later. He asked with a thoughtful look, the fruits usually ripen in an hour. Race, but what kind of berry does this one even look like? Ira said that it is also called mulberry, and it looks very similar to raspberry. She understood her, and said that when she heard the word mulberry, she immediately imagined jam. The head maid often served this to her, because it was good for health and beauty. It was similar in color and taste to blueberry, but less sour and very sweet. Woody started imagining it and said that now he wanted to try it even more. She said that in fact, she had served it to him once too. He apologized and said that before, he simply didn't pay attention to what he ate. He just knew that all her dishes were incredibly delicious, and that's all. She was touched by this, and Nadia said that she looked like she was going to faint. She had an idea. She called him and said that she would make the best jam for him from this mulberry. She was so eager to make jam as soon as possible. He laughed and said that the mulberries would ripen very soon. She said that it was true. But to make jam, you need a lot of sugar. He asked, a lot, how much? She thought about it and said, about the same weight of sugar as the fruit. He was surprised by what he heard and said that it turned out they needed much more than he thought. She said that she was shocked too. Jam is eaten little by little, so it needs to be stored for a long time. And sugar protects against bacteria and mold, acting as an excellent preservative. The fruits in the tree village are very sweet, so you can use less sugar, but even then, you will need at least half the weight of the fruit. That is, for 100 grams of berries, you need 50 grams of sugar. It turns out that to roll up 100 jars of jam, they will need a whole 5 kilograms. He said with a displeased look that they definitely won't be able to cope with such a volume without Mrs. Land's help. They will have to order a delivery from her. He thought that once they make the jam, they will appreciate every spoonful and eat it with gratitude. She looked at the tree and said that he should look there. He said with a happy expression that it was a mulberry. Nadia plucked a berry from the tree and said with a smile that the first harvest would be hers. She called it a joke and put it in the protagonist's mouth. His face blushed and he said in a satisfied tone that it was divinely sweet. It was simply something. He didn't expect it to be so juicy and sweet. She blushed and thought that his smile was much sweeter than the berry. Ira tried the berry and said that there was a certain luxury in eating a whole mulberry in one bite. A multi-fruited fruit is when many small fused fruits form one bumpy berry. In simple terms, it is when tiny flowers gather together and turn into one large fruit. Each small fruit contains a seed. He was surprised by what he heard, looked at it, and said that indeed, it was all made up of small pimples. He had an idea and wondered if each of these pimples could be transformed when crossed. He called Ira and said it was time to get down to business. They would begin right now. She agreed with a joyful expression and said that she would follow him anywhere. She called Nadia and said that it was useless to try to stop the Lord. She said with a smile that she hadn't really intended to. An hour after the crossing, it ripened. He collected the fruits and said that here it is, an elemental mulberry. He thought that his intuition was right. The mulberry crossing was successful. Elemental mulberry, obtained by crossing with elemental trees, explodes when filled with mana, flying in all directions like buckshot. The force of the explosion of these berries, charged with elemental magic, turned out to be incredibly enormous. If you hit the sandboar properly, the fight will be over in a matter of seconds. However, even if they fail to aim accurately, the wide blast radius will still give them a very high chance of hitting their target. The villagers will need some practice, but it will be a great help to them. Nadia looked at it and said she couldn't believe it, turning ordinary berry pimples into real shrapnel. It's amazing. He said the funniest thing was that they were still mulberries, so these shells were completely edible. Ira, with a happy expression, said that the sourness of the mulberry would perfectly complement the flavor of the meat if they stewed them together. She turned around, called her over, and said that they should try it out soon. She agreed, and said that it would significantly strengthen their defenses. Even the elderly should be trained to use it in case of an emergency. This is all well and good, of course, but planting explosive mulberries right under the windows of houses, don't you think that's crazy, even for him? MC, with a worried expression, looked away and said that she was absolutely right about that. For now, he was planting all the elemental trees outside the village, but since they were planning new crossbreeding experiments, they would have to seriously redevelop the plots. Although even with the automatic replanting function, transferring it one tree at a time was very tedious. A status window appeared in front of him and asked if he only had 18 trees left to plant until the next level. He thought that with the new level, he would surely unlock some useful skill. Besides, the accumulated points would be more than enough to plant those 18 trees. Could his tree planting gift really be hinting at this? However, if he spent all his smile points, he would have no resources left at all for the automatic collection function. However, it was fine. He would simply make everyone smile again. With a determined expression, he said that it was decided. He would spend all his points and organize a mass mulberry planting. After that, the system notified him that he had gained a new level, and the number of planted trees had reached the required level. Attention! The automatic replanting skill has been expanded. A new skill has been acquired, grove planning. A village map appeared in front of them, and he, with a surprised expression, wondered what if he touched this tree and tried to move it. He moved the tree to the side, and the system notified that the movement of the selected wind nutmeg had been successfully completed. He looked at it in admiration and asked, what did he just do? Ira, with a joyful expression, said that it was amazing. This meant that with this map, he could manage all the trees in the village. Woody thought that it turned out that everyone around him could see this map. He said it seemed so. Seeing the entire village at a glance and planting trees at any distance was incredibly convenient. He thought it would make managing groves much easier. What does this mod entry mean? The system informed him that this skill combines the functions of grove planning and automatic replanting. If the skills were separated, they would have to first plan the site and then manually replant each tree using automatic replanting. He thought it was clear now, meaning it simply combines site selection and the planting itself. He understood this and said he could leave it as is. The system informed him that the request had been accepted. In this case, due to the merging of skills, he would receive a new skill, Flower Pot. He was surprised by this and asked, Flower Pot now too? The system informed him that Flower Pot is a skill derived from automatic planting, responsible for moving trees. He thought that the function he had from the very beginning had been separated into a separate skill. Nadia said his gift of planting trees never ceases to amaze her. By the way, can residential trees on this map also be moved or removed? The protagonist agreed and said that it seemed everything he grew with his gift was subject to the same rules. She said that in that case, it could really help them out in case of emergency. He asked thoughtfully, do you mean moving houses further away so they don't get destroyed? She said that wasn't quite right. If you move a residential tree to a safe place right along with the residents inside, wouldn't that be the ideal evacuation method? He asked. But would it be possible to move the tree with the people inside? Ira, with a joyful expression, said that even if it didn't work, the mere possibility of moving the entire shelter to a safe zone was incredible. He thought that he hoped that they would never have to deal with emergencies of this scale. A few days later, Nadia asked with a sly grin, "Do they want to become stronger?" They agreed, and she pointed to the table and said that they should take these things then. These were their new weapons. On the table were elemental maroons and mulberries, a lantern on fire nutmeg, and a flask with water nutmeg. Cotton, with a surprised expression, asked if the elemental maroons were the same explosive chestnuts. She said with a smile that mulberries hit even harder, just like buckshot. Meg, looking worried, asked if they wanted them to carry such dangerous explosives with them. She said with a smile that of course it was dangerous, but if they learned to use it properly, there would be no problems. He asked if something was wrong with the lantern and flask too. She said with a smile that these were their indispensable assistants for forays outside the village. They should see if the water nutmeg was filled with mana. The purest water would start oozing out. If they put this directly into the flask, they would get a flask that gradually refills its water supply. They were surprised by this and loudly declared that it was a real magic flask. She hadn't thought that magic fruits could be used like this. So this lantern was powered by fiery nutmeg. Nadia agreed with a smile and asked, "That's a great idea, right?" The lantern and flask work reliably for about 3 days, so their forays would be much more comfortable. Cotton was surprised by this and loudly asked, "Where are they planning to put them anyway?" She grinned and said that now they wouldn't even have to return. They could sit in ambush for days and tirelessly hunt monsters at night. He called her a devil and gone, with a joyful expression, said that, however, if they learned to throw these explosive fruits, hunting would be much easier. He turned to him and said in a serious tone that then he himself would be their demolitionist. He cried out in fear, and she laughed and said that they need not worry. For the most extreme case, they also prepared something special. A little earlier, Simurgh asked loudly in surprise, "Is this really an elemental peach?" MC said that was not all. He showed other elemental fruits, and he said that he really swung it, of course. He said with a joyful expression that after his success with the elemental maroon, he really wanted to crossbreed all the other fruits. His unbridled passion for breeding new magical fruits knew no mercy. He thought that the Lord was clearly consumed by some ominous aura of a crazy breeder. He looked to the side and said that, however, these elemental fruits are still a complete mystery. He asked to be allowed to ask in advance, "Is it safe?" He happily agreed and said that it wasn't just safe, it was almost too harmless. The effect of the elemental apple is to cleanse it of poison. This elemental peach has a wound healing effect. He was very surprised by this and loudly declared that the restorative effect is incredibly beneficial. He joyfully said that he himself still couldn't believe the miracle he had performed. Simurgh said that the scope of application of poison cleansing seems rather narrow. He joyfully said that in fact, this is not true at all. The cleansing effect also works as a general healing of the body and the removal of toxins. Simply put, after using it, the stomach function immediately returns to normal. He was very surprised by this and asked, so he could eat it and improve his health? Woody agreed and said that the elemental apple is therefore excellent for everyday life. The elemental peach is excellent for healing burns, and they had already found that if you eat it regularly, over time even old scars begin to heal. But testing the limits of the healing power in practice is quite difficult. He said that in other words, it would only be possible to test it in practice when someone actually gets hurt. He thought with a serious expression that, of course, it would be better if they didn't have to use it at all, but he was still glad that he could at least somehow help their defenders. He called the Lord and said that he wanted him to tell him about the other fruits. This one was also completely safe. He agreed and said that this was because at the moment, they did not possess any properties at all. He was shocked by what he heard and asked if such a thing really happened. He said with a thoughtful look that perhaps it had some effect, it was just hard to notice, or it would detonate in a couple of months. Of course, this was a joke, but it was unlikely that everything was that bad. He thought that although the tree planting system was really silent, the Simurgh said with a satisfied tone that they would have more than enough explosive and healing fruits. He was already over the moon simply because of the juiciness of the wind fruits. He said with a smile that he was incredibly happy that his breeding efforts had been to his liking. He handed him the fruit and wondered why he seemed to be looking at him with some suspicious tenderness. He began collecting the fruits in a bag and said that he would leave the rest of the wind fruits here. However, it was time for him to start redesigning their garden with the help of the Grove plan. He asked him to wait and said that he almost forgot because he had something important to tell him. He should imagine that a divine beast was heading to their tree village. At the same time, Lan was walking through the desert with a crowd of people, and the adventurers were watching them with tense expressions. Garda quietly asked how it was that their caravan had grown into such a crowd. Val quietly agreed and said that they had simply sold out of all their goods and were planning to peacefully return to the village. The people heard this, fell to their knees, and loudly apologized for burdening them with their presence. They understood perfectly well that they were nothing but a burden. For old people like them, life itself was a grave sin. Tet turned to them, asked them to wait in a worried tone, and asked what they were saying. There was no question of that. They should raise their eyes. She cast a displeased glance at the two, and Lon said that she apologized for them. They simply couldn't keep their mouths shut. The old men said that everything was fine. After all, They were the ones who, disregarding propriety, begged to be taken with them to the tree village. They had dreamed of leaving their homeland for a long time. There was no work, hunger was constant, and in their home village, they had only met with looks of disdain. She said that they also hoped that in the rich tree village, there would be some kind of work for them, thanks to which they would no longer be looked at like trash. They loudly agreed and said they were ready to weed, sweep the streets, and take on absolutely any dirty work. She said with a friendly smile that the lord and the headman would decide this issue on the spot when they arrived in the village. They agreed with a worried look and said they understood everything. She looked at them with concern and thought of the old people leaving their home communities to save the young. Alas, for the local barren desert, this is a very common sight. Several elderly people came to her and said that they asked to be taken with her when she set out tomorrow. They lied to the headman of their village, saying that they were just going there to see, but they had a real goal. Currently, she considered leaving for certain death to ease the burden of her home village and give the young a chance to survive and try to beg the residents of the tree village for shelter for them. After all, deep down, each of them desperately wants to live until their last breath. She is also sure that if it were the Lord's will, his great power will be able to save these unfortunates and their abandoned homes. However, why then? Even though she understands in her mind that everything should go smoothly, a nasty, anxious premonition persistently creeps into her head. Will everything really continue to go so smoothly? She said with a serious expression that she hoped that these were just her empty fears. Later that night, several people were crawling underground behind them, who came out and said that the heat had finally subsided. She was so hungry. They needed to endure a little longer. His sweet children should follow him. The shrine was already right in front of them. The next morning, in the neighboring village, next to the tree village, the villager listened to the girl and asked with surprise, "Will the old people never come back?" She said with a sad expression that he was such a fool. Their trip to the tree village was just a pretext. They went to certain death for the good of their community, that was obvious. He couldn't believe it and asked loudly, "But why did they do that?" She became angry about this and said loudly that it was because they had almost no food. They just didn't want to burden them and decided to sacrifice themselves. Didn't he still understand? He said loudly, with fire in his eyes, that this was impossible. How could they not understand that even if they were having a hard time and were dying of hunger, they were still one big family? She sighed and said that was why they had lied to him, the idiot, because they knew perfectly well that he would lay down his life but would not let them go. He asked loudly in surprise. If she understood everything, why didn't she tell him right away? She was his wife after all. He gritted his teeth and asked how he had allowed this to happen. He would also go to the tree village. At the same time, the contented old people were lying in a clearing in the village and asked if paradise really turned out to be such a wonderful place. Did it mean that they had perished in this damn desert and ended up straight in paradise? The protagonist was worried by what he had heard, approached them, and loudly said that they were still alive. This was an ordinary, earthly tree village. First, they should get some food and rest after the journey. Ira approached them with a basket of fruit and said it was a modest treat from the Lord as a token of hospitality. Once they had their fill, they would definitely tell them more about their home village. Later, Lon and the adventurers came to the warehouse, and Tet said loudly in surprise that she hadn't thought there would be so much dried fruit. Amazingly, if they sold this entire batch, they would make a fortune. She agreed, and he said that this time, among other things, they had prepared fruit tea and some dried meat for sale. They looked at it with admiration and said that, however, she expected nothing less from the Lord. Such meticulous preparation. It seemed they were in for another extremely profitable deal. He said he was glad to hear they liked it. He thought that, although strictly speaking, the lion's share of these supplies was the result of Fiona's persistent training. She took his hands and said she was incredibly grateful to him. The goods from the tree village are in great demand, so she guarantees the next fair will be even more successful. Right, she almost forgot something. She laid the items out in front of him and said that here was his payment for the last shipment. There were some copper coins and items made from monster bones, as well as armor made from monster skins. Ira said admiringly that these were a bone dagger and leather bracers. MC was also surprised and said that they were in excellent condition, ready to go into battle right now. Lon said that she was glad that they were satisfied. He said with a smile that these weapons and armor were made by artisans from that very neighboring village. She said that the locals simply had golden hands. They managed to recycle any monster remains into useful equipment. He thought that was very interesting. So the residents of the neighboring village know how to not only hunt, but also craft excellent things. Wait, but if they have such production, then things in the community aren't so bad? But then, for what purpose did these old men travel such a long way to their village? Do they want to propose a deal? Or set up a trade in equipment? Perhaps sell. But what do they have to offer? He looked at Lan, and with a very worried expression, wondered if this could really be human trafficking. He calmed down and thought that this was some kind of nonsense. Is this lady really capable of such a thing? Surely she isn't capable of it?